are moving. Thank you. We're moving forward as a public workshop since we do not have quorum present. If there was anything on the agenda that was listed as a potential action, no actions will be happening today. Staff will be facilitating this meeting and we'll do public comment after each listed item. We'll address board members that are listed in the room first and then go online and then also address members of the public. And then also just a quick reminder, because we do not have quorum and we've had a previous budget workshop, the recommendation is to keep your commentary to yourselves and during the actual question and comment process and not really discuss these items amongst yourselves so that we can keep ourselves in a public workshop forum. And with that, I'll pass it on to Vicken Kasarjan.
Well, good morning, everybody. I just, thank you very much for participating in this budget workshop. I just want to take a moment to recognize our staff. So as the single most important resource for MCE, I want to recognize our wonderful, dedicated staff that have been working diligently with their hearts and minds for a long time in challenging conditions. Our diverse staff are dedicated to our mission and vision, and based on those fundamental beliefs, deliver the best products, programs, and energy resources possible in challenging financial, legal, regulatory, and energy market environments. We are really proud of our staff, and I hope this brief statement shows how much we care for them and appreciate them. Please join me in recognizing all of our amazing staff. And with that, Jamie, it's all.
Any staff who are able to reduce the volume on the TV back there? That'd be great while we get started. Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. I know many of us have met over the years, but I wanted to reintroduce myself because I was absent for much of last year while I was away on maternity leave. So I missed many of the meetings, but thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I am Jamie Tuckey. I'm MCE's Chief Customer Officer, and I helped to form our organization in 2008. So I've spent almost 20 years helping to grow and sustain our organization. As our Chief Customer Officer, I'm responsible for all of the public-facing work. So that includes public affairs, customer programs, strategic initiatives, and let's see, who am I missing? Customer operations. And of course, that's working with a tremendous team of staff to get all of that work done. Today, I want to just spend a couple of minutes going over a brief recap from our budget workshop that we had a couple of weeks ago. I think it'll help ground us for our discussion today. And I want to also note that if you hear my congestion, I am not contagious. I'm just recovering from a sinus infection. So don't be afraid to chat with me if you have any questions or anything during the breaks. Can we pull up my slides, please? Today, after we go over this brief workshop, we're going to talk about MCE's energy portfolio and different options for our future. We're going to talk about options for a rate reduction for our customers, and we're also going to be going into our proposed fiscal year budget, certain elements of that. And still waiting for those slides to come up, but I can wing it. So excuse me, I want to get us started. So at our budget workshop last time, we talked about a few things. One of the things we talked about was our strategic plan for energy services. And that is a plan that we update every year, and it focuses on our energy services, light green, deep green, local soul, a high-level overview of our power supply, and also an in-depth overview of our customer programs and all of the goals and the metrics associated with those programs and what we're offering to our customers. One of the key elements of the strategic plan that we update every year is our agency priorities, and they map to support our mission and vision. We create goals for each of those agency priorities and metrics as well that all of our staff at MCE work on throughout the year to create progress. And I'm so sorry that our slides aren't up yet, but I want to thank the board for your feedback about the agency priorities. There was a really great question. There are 7 of them, but there was a really great question about how do we prioritize these? And that question came up because we use these priorities to help make our decisions, right? All of the work that we're doing, we're thinking about our mission, our vision, our priorities, and our values. And 7 is a high number. So let's see, next slide. Thank you so much. Great. So this is a slide with a high level, like a brief overview of our agency priorities. They are listed in the best, to the best of our ability, in general priority for how we focus our work at MCE. And the first, of course, is reducing greenhouse gas emissions and fostering equity. We have lowering customer costs, using our funds wisely, strengthening governance practices and supporting shared understanding, achieving operational excellence and fostering an engaging employee experience, and telling our story to inspire action. And you'll notice that there's some gray text in parentheses, that you saw that in your packet. That was based on some other great feedback that we had from the board. So one of our priorities is to strengthen governance practices and support shared understanding. Part of that is by having easy to understand, straightforward, accurate, and simple messaging. And some of the feedback that we heard was that a couple of the priorities were maybe not as clear and direct as they could be. So they've been revised in full in their plan, their complete sentences here, and adjusted slightly on the slide as well. Next slide, please. One of the other things we talked about at our workshop were options for reducing program investments. So if you were at the workshop, we went through all of our customer programs, what the goals are, the metrics, our funding sources, how much money we're spending on each of those programs, and the impacts that they have in our community in terms of customer savings, greenhouse gas emissions, whether they were for equity customers or all customers. And I wanted to bring this slide back to your attention because your board does have an option, if you would like, to reduce some of our spending in our proposed budget for the next fiscal year. We could scale back funding or close end funding for some of our programs, including our EV rebates. Those are rebates for customers who are income qualified and want to purchase an EV and will receive a rebate to help reduce the cost. We could also close our EV charging program, and those are rebates for chargers at multifamily properties or at public parking lots. Those would be for new EV charging rebates. That program will continue to be open because it's a longer process to actually get the charger installed and have your rebate. And then the last thing that we could reduce or eliminate funding for is for electrification incentives. And those are for things like heat pump water heaters, various incentives that support other programs. So I wanted to flag this for you. All in all, it totals up to $5.3 million, and we'll be looking to feedback from your board about whether you want to continue the investments in these programs as proposed, or if you would like to reduce them or scale back entirely. Next slide. We also had a great question about what is the value proposition for MCE? If I'm out in the community and someone says, why should I choose MCE? We want you to be able to answer that question and have the information that we would share. And so we pulled this slide together, and the answer is that MCE provides cleaner energy, local control, community benefits, and competitive and stable rates. So cleaner energy, we provide significantly more renewable energy than PG&E and also more carbon-free energy. For the last power content label from 2024, MCE was at 69% renewable compared to 23% renewable with PG&E. So that's the most, I think the most obvious is that you can get cleaner energy if you choose MCE. Second is that we're community first and we're not for profit. I love this. I love knowing that as a customer of MCE, a portion of what I'm spending on my monthly bill, instead of going to pay shareholder profits, is going to be invested back into my community. It's going to be used for rebates to help customers to potentially buy EVs or to upgrade their home or their business so that they can save money on their electricity bills and have a healthier environment to live or work in because of those energy efficiency upgrades. We're investing in workforce development, so we're helping people get trained up, our youth, we're helping them get jobs, and supporting benefits that impact our neighbors and our communities. The next is stable rates. Historically, MCE has changed our rates once a year or less than that. And we also offer income qualified discounts and bill assistance for our customers. The stable rates is a big one, especially for commercial businesses. They're looking to plan their budget for their year, and they know with MCE that historically they can rely on those rates. They're going to be steady, whereas with PG&E, they're changing multiple times a year, and they don't have that same reliability. I want to highlight one of our income qualified discounts that I think you're all familiar with that will be coming to you again for consideration this year, and that's the MCE Cares credit, where we offer a monthly discount to our homes, income qualified homes, and also small businesses every month so that we can help reduce their costs. That's the MCE Cares credit. Last year, your board approved 5 million before that as well, and we'll be discussing with you today options for your consideration. And the last point that I want to make about why customers should choose MCE or might choose MCE is because of local control and accountability, because of all of you. We are a community-based organization. We're governed by our board of elected officials. Thank you so much for your time and for the work that you do for MCE, for representing us. We have our meetings, obviously, in public. We invite the public to engage with us, and it's an opportunity to really help shape this business in a way that they don't have with PG&E. So happy to answer any questions. And yes, Director McCormick.
Sorry. This is great. I really appreciate this crystallizing it down. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
If I can offer a couple of opinions, sorry. I think there's magic in 3. We
Okay.
all know that, right? I mean, I'm all the stuff I've done, all the go-to-market stuff in
Yep.
corporate and tech. It's all 3.
Okay.
If I can make a suggestion, it's just whatever. Two thoughts come to mind. One is I actually think the local control accountability, while personally feels great because we're a part of that, really fits under bullet 2. I mean, that to me is all about the community first because we are. So I don't know if that would be separate.
Okay.
And stable rates. I mean, we do own a business. We own a small business. Stable rates, like that's fine, but competitive rates are more important. I think stable is like, to me, it's not. I think for most people, when we're going after and like, if I talk to my constituents, why are you choosing PG&E? Stable rates feels like we are more expensive. We're like a premium product, and we're offering you stability. But if we're competitive, implying even cheaper, which we are most of the time, that actually feels better. I mean, those are just 2 comments I'd have on it. Otherwise, this is really helpful to kind of like get it all worked out. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate the feedback.
I wrote the exact same thing down in terms of the stable rates, not the magic of 3. I think that's interesting. I haven't heard about that, but this whole so far what we've already covered really provides clarity. As somebody who's on our board that wants to speak clearly about this agency and be, a voice, a positive voice for this agency, this really helps. I did. Around stable rates, I did say competitive rates is missing, and I think that we can do that. And then on the previous slides, that's a whole nother topic that we can talk about later in terms of how we approach the community benefit, what the policy is around the percentage of net income or gross income that we put towards community benefit and how we prioritize that. And then on the first slide, in terms of just the agency priorities, do we want to prioritize those? Because those are in general, those are not in numbered order in terms of the board's priority, but maybe that would provide more clarity for the board if we actually did prioritize those.
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you so much for all of that feedback. And we'll take that and update the information that we have here. So I welcome any other feedback as well. It's super helpful to have your perspectives. And that's a huge part of the reason that we value you on our board. And I just wanted to say one comment in response to the agency priorities is we organize them to the best that we could in terms of prioritization. But I do want to point out that depending on what you're looking at, like what you're considering in terms of weighing the agency priorities, the prioritization of them might change. Like whether you're looking at rates or customer programs or something specifically for a priority population who needs a certain benefit or program from MCE, they might have to be slightly adjusted. So that part is tricky, but something that we can continue to dive into. Dr. Nakamura.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate all 4 of these, but not necessarily why customers choose. It's like why I promote MCE. This is my list here of why I think that MCE is something that is good for customers. So maybe the last bullet point, local control and accountability, isn't necessarily why customers choose it. But I do, and I also agree with the stable rate nomenclature here. Is like maybe it should be more, we should lean into competitive. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you so much for your feedback. If there aren't any other questions, I'd love to kick off our next item, which is MCE's energy portfolio considerations. Johnny or Vidi? Andy, one of our staff or many of them will be joining us. Thank you. Of my mask, sorry.
Biddy, while you're getting set up, I think actually we should take some public comment from online and in the room. So I know that some directors have already asked questions. Are there any other questions from the directors on Jamie's presentation? Nope. Okay, online. Tanya, could you help us out if we have any online? Okay, great. Thanks so much. Back to you, Biddy.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, so today we're going to be presenting to you portfolio options, our energy portfolio options for your consideration as we think about our budget and rate setting process for the upcoming fiscal year. What we've tried to do through this presentation is to provide you necessary information that you all will need to balance our cost, our rates, as well as impacts on the power content label, which is something that we just discussed in Jamie's presentation. That is the value proposition that one of the value proposition of why customers choose MCE. Also, I want to note that over the last few weeks, we have been talking about energy portfolio options, and we've received a lot of good feedback from your board as well as members of the public. So thank you for all of that feedback. And what we've tried to do is that we try to incorporate a lot of that feedback and to try to provide you an analysis, especially as it relates to our short-term PPAs as well as emission accounting in an hourly environment. So what we're hoping for is that this additional information will help you set the policies for energy portfolio management and energy portfolio considerations in the upcoming 1 or 2 fiscal years. So with that, I want to start the presentation. If somebody can bring up the slides. Next slide, please. So I want to start with a reminder about our compliance obligations and one of the 2 reasons why we do energy procurement. So the first big goal that MCE has is to meet all of its compliance requirements as set up by the CPUC, who's our main regulator, as well as state mandated programs like Renewable Portfolio Standard. So I want to list out 3 main regulatory obligations that we have that we're trying to meet at all times through our energy procurement activities. So the first one and the most important one, and we've discussed it at some previous meetings, is the Integrated Resource Plan. This is the planning process through which the California Public Utility Commission decides what additional and new resources will be needed on the grid for reliability and for emissions reductions. So through this process, over the last 6 or 7 years, MCE has been mandated to procure and bring online 720 megawatts of qualifying capacity by 2032. That translates to a little over 1,050 megawatts of contracted capacity. And we talked about it during the presentations that we made at the IRP. And that is a very important mandate that we're trying to comply with when we're thinking about our energy procurement and building our long-term portfolio. The next one I want to highlight is the Renewable Portfolio Standard. I'm sure folks in this room are already familiar with it, but I'll just state it again. This is a state-mandated program where load-serving entities in California are required to meet at least 60% of their retail sales should be met with renewable energy by 2030. So this is a metric that MCE has already achieved and exceeded in the past, but I still want to emphasize that this is still an ongoing compliance requirement that we have to continue to meet with the state mandated program. And then the last one I want to highlight is this resource adequacy program. I know we talked a lot about RA and resource adequacy. This is also a CPUC program. So the CPUC in the IRP tells load-serving entities what kind of resources need to be built in the future for grid reliability. But then as we turn to the current environment and the operational environment, the RA program ensures that the system operator has access to enough capacity so that they can maintain grid reliability. And that is the RA program. And as a CPUC load-serving entity, we're required to secure a certain amount of hour-month capacity to meet this mandate. So these are compliance requirements that MCE has met at all times, and our goal is to continue to meet those in the future as well. Next slide, please. Now, I want to talk a little bit about procurement considerations where your board has control over how we set policies to build a portfolio for MCE, especially as we look at the next 2 to 3 fiscal years, it being a challenging year for our rates and our finances. So I think the first one is something that we've been talking about and we'll talk about a lot in the upcoming slides, but it's something that your board sets for MCE staff as what should our power content look like for light green and deep green. And there is flexibility in being able to adjust these targets for the light green portfolio. And we're going to be presenting you some options related to that later in the day. Another tool that we have in our toolbox is how we meet the RPS compliance requirements. So there is some flexibility on how we can meet the program requirements for RPS standard. In the past, MCE has always retired the renewable energy that it bought to meet the RPS standard, but we have some flexibility where we can actually use something called as banking. It's a technical term, but basically what it means is that if MCE exceeded the minimum compliance requirements in 1 year, then it can carry those excess credits to a future year to meet compliance and actually reduce the amount of renewable energy that it needs to buy in that particular year. So there's some flexibility in that. And given that we had a good amount of renewable energy that we put on the grid in 2025, we might be able to carry it forward to 26 and 27. So 25 to 27 is the compliance period that we're looking at. So I wanted to emphasize that that's also a tool in our toolbox to play with when we're thinking about setting a portfolio and thinking about our rates and our options. And then last is something that MCE has historically used, but it has not been our policy to use any other type of renewable energy than bundled energy, but that still is an option that we may want to consider. Next slide, please. And then one other thing that I want to highlight as we're thinking about these next couple of years, as well as building our portfolio for the long term, is that there are a few state policies that I wanted to highlight. But basically, the bottom line is that all of the state policies and accounting and requirements are moving towards an hourly accounting. So in the future, as we think about our long-term portfolio, me and my team, we're already looking at our portfolio in terms of an hourly matching of our generation and load. So that's where everything is headed. And these are just policies that, we've discussed a lot, so I just quickly go over them. The power content label is going to require us to start accounting for emissions on an hourly basis, starting in reporting year 27, that will be reported in 28. And then the CPUC RA program is already there. We are currently required to meet hourly obligations for RA every month. And again, the SB 100 goal is also pushing us in that direction because the IRP planning process is also doing hourly emissions accounting and figuring out what we need for reliability and emission reductions. So everything's headed in that direction, and MCE is also headed in that direction eventually. Next slide, please. I don't want to reiterate what our agency priorities are. Jamie already went over them really well. I think for this discussion, the first four are going to be the most important. But I still wanted us to be thinking about these as guiding principles as we decide to choose a path forward. Next slide, please. Okay, and with that, I'm actually going to pass it to Andy Twilling, who will be walking us through an analysis that she did on emissions for our short-term PPAs. Thank you.
All right. Hey, everyone. My name is Andy Twilling. I recently joined MCE last month, so nice to see you all, meet many of you. So yeah, I'm going to be presenting some information about our short-term and GHG-free energy contracts. So currently, CEC regulations don't distinguish emissions based on the length of the contract. The regulations only distinguish emissions based on the type of resource that generates the energy. So that, being solar or wind or natural gas. Starting in 2028, those CEC regulations will require hourly emissions accounting. And MCE's current understanding is that there will not be any difference in emissions accounting based on the length of contract still going forward. So whether it's a 1-year contract or a 20-year contract, if it's coming from solar, it will be treated the same way in our emissions accounting. And just want to note that some of MCE's customers rely on MCE's products to meet their greenhouse gas emission goals, their climate action plans. And so we want to follow the CEC guidelines in order to be able to be in line with the state guidelines for our portfolio. So having said that, I'm going to go over the effect of the short-term PPAs and greenhouse gas-free energy in our portfolio right now. So this is for MCE's 2024 PCL emissions for light green. So currently, we reported 1 pound of CO2e per megawatt hour in 2024. And if we had replaced all of the short-term PPAs and greenhouse gas-free energy in that portfolio with unspecified power, which has high emissions that are associated with unspecified power, then we would have been at 606 pounds of CO2e per megawatt hour. So if we can go to the next slide. Okay. Glad to provide it. If you go one back. Yeah, okay, perfect. So just gonna give you a little bit more information about these purchases. So the decision to purchase the PCC1 bundled renewable energy rather than PCC3, which is unbundled, reflects MCE's commitment to making impactful purchases. And renewable project investors, they rely on revenues from both short and long-term contracts in order to finance projects. So both short and long-term contracts are really important to be able to support renewable energy on the grid and have those projects be financed and built. And then Currently, MCE's long-term contract portfolio is pretty solar heavy. And so short-term PPAs and other greenhouse gas-free energy, when we move to hourly accounting, if they have different generation profiles, that may actually help MCE's portfolio and reduce emissions if it better matches our load shape. So that is what Johnny is going to go into, and I hope that clarifies some of your questions.
Thank you, Andy. Can you hear me well enough now? So just as a fan fact too, the E in the pounds of CO2 E per megawatt hour is equivalent of, and usually that's because carbon dioxide is what is used as the standard for measuring greenhouse gas effects on global warming. So for those of you who have been serving in or have attended the XCOM or the technical committee, you have seen a version of this. But for the rest of you, I'll be going through this once more. And what you're seeing here are the power content scenarios that we have looked at and that Vidhi had spoken about as your board having the opportunity or the lever to either adjust up or down, depending on where you want the actual content of our energy be. And to begin with, scenario one, which is the status quo, is what is currently planned with nothing changing based on MCE's internal clean goals. The second scenario, which is the 60-95 target, is keeping renewable targets at 60% and not escalating as the plan was to escalate it to 85% by 2029, then later adjusted to 2031 because of market circumstances. So option two will be to keep that at 60%, but still achieve 95% carbon-free equivalent percentage for all the years. Option three, or rather scenario three, is similar to scenario two in the sense that renewable remains at 60%, but the carbon-free content comes back down to 70%. And then options 4 through 6 is different in the sense that you're bringing down the renewable percentage of MCE's portfolio to match exactly what is in the RPS mandate, and then bringing down the levels for the carbon-free content from 95 in option 4 to 85 in option 5 and 70% in option 6. And lastly, the seventh scenario is employing banking, which Vidhi had touched upon earlier, and keeping the carbon-free percentages at 70%. These options would affect the calendar years of 26, 27, and 28, as those are the 3 calendar years that interface with the 2 fiscal years that we are currently looking at. And it would not affect any of the deep green percentages. Deep green would still be at 100% renewable. And then the other part, depending on which option your board chooses, this may require selling of MCE contracted resources where necessary. Next slide, please. What I'm showing here is the table above, which shows where the RPS mandates for the state are in comparison to where MCE's RPS mandates for light green are, based on the adjusted scaling, where it's at 60% right now and scaling all the way to 80%. So the options where you had the 60% previously would keep it at 60 and not escalating to 80%. And then for the carbon free based on SB 100 and later on SB 1158, the state is looking to get to 100% carbon free by 2045. And MCE's carbon free goals are currently at 95% for those years up until we need to get to 100%. On the right side is an illustration showing exactly how banking would work. And as you've heard earlier, for 2025, given that we have somewhat more renewable content, estimating at about 70%. We still have some delivery still trickling in. That year has not yet been fully closed. And so based off of that, when you take that into account and look at 2026 and 2027, with 2026 requirements being at 49 and 27 being at 52, anything that's above the 47% for 2025 can be used to apply into 2026 and 2027, either by supplying it evenly or using it as you see fit for those years. What I'm showing in the lower chat is that it's being applied equally among both of them, which then results in an effective renewable percentage of 45% for 26 and 27. It's also important to note that the power content label usually reflects the annual results in generation and does not necessarily take or interact with how banking or the RPS program works. The power content label is more of a snapshot of what actually generated from that year. And then the RPS with banking is a separate program that allows you to move around your excess procurement as sees fit based on the requirements of the program. Next slide, please.
Can I try a question? Sorry, I just want to make sure because these things come in and out of my head really quickly when they happen. So the idea of banking would work in other scenarios. So if we, for example, if we say we're looking at 60% and in 2025, we had 70%, we could use that 10% differential and distribute it to future years if we wanted to, correct?
Yes, that's
okay.
correct.
Good. I'm glad my brain caught that one. Thank you.
I'm sorry, so, and just your last point on the previous slide. So it sounds like because we're looking at a 3-year period that we can bank, at the end of the 3-year period, we do our accounting, it'll all work. But the power label, that one has to reflect the actual. Is that what that, I mean, can we go back one slide? Because I think that last bullet on that slide is really important, right? Because basically that's to say the power label is going to say the actual, right? Is that how I'm reading that?
Yes,
and we have to
it's a snapshot of the year.
So that one bullet's doing a lot of heavy lifting, what you're saying here, basically, because you're saying we'd have to really message around it, right? We'd have to say, trust us, we're different than PG&E because we're not sneaky, but we have to do this whole thing to kind of say why we're banking and then doing it. It feels like a challenge, right? Because you have to basically then you have to educate the customers in how this whole banking kind of thing works, right? I mean, is that what we're saying here on this last bullet there?
Yeah, we may need to make some messaging, but then what's of important to note here is that the RPS and the power source disclosure are usually two separate programs. And given that in the past we've been retiring all of our renewables, they've kind of worked as a proxy of each other.
Okay.
But what we are showing in terms of banking is just an option of what you have at your disposal in making these decisions. And so should we do that, we are just taking advantage, or we are using all the options within the RPS program.
Right. No, I understand. Yeah, we're allowed to do it. It's more like, do we want to? Because of which, again, we'll come back eventually to our priorities and what's the most important thing we need to do, right? So, and how we kind of choose between the priorities, right? Thank you.
Can I just ask though, on the power content label, do you have any flexibility to provide any footnotes or anything else, or is it completely locked down under state law? Meaning, could you show your 3-year average rather in addition to the annual, or is it completely constrained?
It's constrained, so there's very limited flexibility you have on the power content label because it's a separate program.
Right.
It doesn't really care about how you meet or you do your RPS program as well.
And presumably because PG&E has been reporting very low numbers in the initial years of that 3-year period, they're going to have high numbers in those outer years, presumably, to meet the compliance requirements.
They could use a whole myriad of options that they have, and I could at the end of the presentation go back into that discussion and provide more information on that.
Thank you.
One of the former slides said evaluate use of banked credits for prior years to meet our RPS. Question: have we ever used them? And if not, how many credits do we have available?
So we haven't used them in the past. So we have retired everything up to 2024. For 2025, given that the actual filing for that is not due until later in June. And we still have renewable energy trickling in and settlements for that. So we don't have the final numbers because there's a delay between when deliveries happen in the market and when you actually get to do the true up for that. Once that information is there, you'll be able to see that on the power content label how much renewable there is.
So PG&E also has credits?
We presume so, but we don't know how much they're actually retiring or not retiring.
So actually, these credits are a way of pretending that we're meeting our goals, both PG&E and ourselves, instead of being, true in our objectives.
I would say the power content label itself kind of shows you exactly of what happened within the year. So if you're actually working towards meeting your goals, it will reflect on the power content label. And so the RPS program kind of has different rules on how you can show compliance. And those are the options that have been provided within that to show compliance for that.
Okay.
And the slide that is in front of you now is showing the same options that we talked about earlier, the scenarios 1 through 7, from a lens of what it means on our finances or the budget in terms of the cost of energy and the changes between status quo and scenario 7 and the myriad of scenarios in between for fiscal year 26-27 and also fiscal year 27-28, where for 26-27, it unlocks up to 17 million, depending on the option that or the scenario that your board chooses. And for 27-28, it unlocks up to 21 million, depending on the scenario that your board chooses. Next slide, please.
Could I ask a question before you move off from that slide? I think this slide is really interesting. So my first question is, I'm assuming the cost of energy are projections. So how reliable are those numbers? Maybe more so for 26, 27, 27, 28. What is the reliability of looking at those cost numbers? Is my first question.
I would say based on the contracts that we've already signed so far, the reliability is pretty high.
Great.
Of course,
great.
there is still market considerations that would happen as we walk through the year, depending on where the price is set for the market, and that might affect some of the costs.
Okay,
But,
good. No, that makes sense because I was wondering where that came from, and it came from existing contracts. So the reliability, I think, is really strong, and that's good to see the numbers generally moving down for 27, 28. And my next question is, while I appreciate all of these options and you're sort of planting some seeds that as a board we should think about choosing an option or a scenario, but I also want to just ask whether or not we could choose sort of a not to exceed cost of energy, where we then set sort of a floor and a ceiling so that staff could have some flexibility to either use the banking option or use other things to achieve the end result with a little bit of flexibility, but that if we can really set and establish as a board a cost of energy, then we can more reliably, I'm hoping, thinking, move to what we're going to do with rate generation. Is that another way to look at this rather than saying, as a board, we want to just choose one option for the scenarios? Could we blend a little bit or set a floor and ceiling, but have our board decision be more about the cost of energy?
I'm glad you brought that up. Later on in the slides, there's actually on the recommendation slide, we talk about that.
Oh.
And so I'm not trying not to
Okay.
jump ahead. But
I didn't jump ahead, but thank you. That's great. Thank you.
And I was going to have a comment on that, but I'm going to, with my, with all respect, with my colleague here, but I'm going to wait for that slide that she already, yeah, she's so smart. I'm sitting next to so many smart people here. So I'll wait for that slide coming up, and then I'll share my thoughts.
Can I ask additional question there about the potential cost savings? So for fiscal 26-27, from other materials you provided, you're expecting to spend about 50 million on the combination of PCC1 plus greenhouse gas, other attributes. And it says you can, even in the most cost-cutting scenario, you can only save 17 million. Is that because you need those other attributes to meet minimum requirements, or is it because those attributes are already locked in?
So there's a little bit of two different things happening. One is that we are not in a position to offload everything.
So some of them are contracts that were multi-year contracts that have already been locked in.
There is multi-year contracts in there, and
Right.
then there's also the fact that when you're signing the contract, you might sign it at one price, and where the market is right now is a different price. So the cost thereabout is not one-to-one.
Okay. And then on the 27-28, because it seems like there's a lot more price risk there in terms of the assumptions, because you are at the end of a compliance period. And so you could have this spiking of prices again. And so I know you said you've got a lot of certainty around those numbers, but is that more for 26-27 and 27-28? There's a lot more uncertainty, or if you have got certainty, why is that? Because it seems like it's going to be a really volatile period in terms of pricing.
So yes, you are right. The further out you go in the years, the more uncertainty grows.
Right.
But I'm trying to balance between providing you the information that you need, but then
Right.
also realizing that this is also a public meeting, so there's so much I can provide.
Right.
In this.
Yeah, because it just seems that a delta could be huge given that prices spiked 6x, did they, during the end of the last compliance period? That seems like a very wide margin of risk in relation to the numbers you're providing for 27-28.
That's correct. There's
Thank you.
variability, and based on where the market sets at that time, then we will be able to reevaluate and provide more accurate numbers at that point. I think I'm going to kindly request that if you have questions, to hold until we get to the end, and I'll be able to answer most of them as best as I can. On the next slide, we're kind of shifting now focus a little bit and going more into the details of how the hourly accounting would work. And what you're seeing in front of you is one of 4 accounting scenarios that may happen for any given hour based on the hourly accounting. In hour 1, or scenario 1 of hour 1, is that you meet your entire load requirements with all of clean energy. So in that case, for us, it will be we meet all of our load for that particular hour based on the energy portfolio that we have, and in that case would have 0 emissions. In the different hour, you could only have been meeting about 70 if of the 100, and so 30% of that would go into your emissions because you're taking from the system. There's the third option where your actual, based on your contracted resources for a particular hour, you could be producing more than what you actually need for the load. And so in that sense, to the extent that the excess renewable energy is reducing emissions on the grid, that will go into a bucket that is called avoided GHG emissions. And then there's a fourth scenario where this doesn't apply to MCE, but it's a scenario that could happen based off of the accounting, is that you might have a mix of renewable and also emitting resources as part of your portfolio. And if you exceed what your load requirements for that hour, you're not only accounted for the 30 to get to your goal, all 50 of that goes as part of your emissions because those are the emissions that you did contribute onto the grid. And however, for MCE's purposes, it will be one of the three scenarios that's most likely to happen because we do not contract for natural gas. Next slide, please. And so what this slide is showing those different scenarios based off of an average hourly profile, showing about the generation of renewables, what the short-term bundled renewables might look like with hydro for carbon-free and then nuclear as well. And so the key thing to point out here is that depending on how those short-term renewables are signed, you may not have the hourly profile at the time. And so it might show up in a myriad of different ways. It could mimic solar if most of those renewables are coming from a solar heavy profile. If it's coming from a wind heavy profile, it will mimic what wind looks like. And then if it's coming from a mix of that, including baseload, it might look more flat. So, and this is kind of showing what it might look like for a given year on an average. And the next slide kind of goes more of a breakdown in it. And what this shows is how this might change based on the different months of the year. And because generations tend to differ. So for example, if you see like in a month like June, these of course, excess generation in the middle hours of the day. In February, it's a whole lot less. In September is slightly less than June, but you still have some excess at the middle of the day. And then in November kind of looks slightly different as well. And so this can happen for any given month or any given day. However, here I'm showing just 4 different months that tend to apply in different seasons so that you can have an idea of what the different seasons look like and how that might account for in terms of generation and accounting of the emissions. Next slide, please. This slide is where I'm going to talk about how we were able to arrive at estimates on our hourly emissions accounting. And so what you're seeing in the first solid line, that's where the CAISO emissions in metric tons of CO2 per megawatt hour on an average hourly shape looks like, where of course in the middle of the day it's slightly lower because of heavy prevalence of solar, and during the shoulder hours of a day it's higher. The dotted green line shows you where MCE's emissions based on an hourly estimates would be or would settle at. And as you can see, it's significantly lower than where the state would be. On the right-hand side, it shows you the absolute emissions, the actual emissions that you emit, and not the emissions factor. And it's showing that based off of the same, but for every hour using the right axis. These numbers were calculated based off of CAISO's 2024 actual emissions to come up to arrive with that. And one important thing that I'd like to point out here for the actual template that we'll be using in terms of reporting on the hourly emissions, those emissions are going to be calculated based off of excess renewables, unclaimed natural gas, and imports. Those 3 categories that will end up being used form part of the mix that is the CAISO emissions, with the rest of the mix coming from the actual generation that is claimed from all the load-serving entities. So in calculating for this, this was the most practical way we could estimate for that, given that there's no practical way for us to separate between what is LSC's generation and what is unclaimed or excess generation. And we'll have to wait until after 2027 for those numbers to be provided within the template itself. Next slide, please. And kind of to bring it back, this is what the 2024 power content label for MCE was. And this is based on annual accounting. And as you have seen before, we were, for light green, we were at 1 pound of CO2 emissions per megawatt hour, while the state was at 359. Moving forward, there are changes that will be happening. And two of the changes that we currently understand is that there will be an extra column there that will be showing whole portfolio emissions. So instead of looking at each one of the particular programs, it's going to look at your loss adjusted load in totality against all your resources and then calculate for what the emissions for that would look like. And this would apply for 2025 onwards. The other change is that for 2027 onwards, which we have been calling the hourly accounting, there will also be the report where you have to report on hourly based on your load and your generation to come up with that carbon intensity number in addition to this. I would like to finish, then I can, I promise I'll answer all your questions. So with that, if you could show the next slide, please. This again comes back to the various scenarios that I'd been showing, but then in this sense, instead of looking at the financial impact of that, we're looking at the emissions impact of it. And based on the status quo, we are showing it's for 2026, which is still based on annual accounting. It's showing starting at 20 pounds of CO2 per megawatt hour, all the way to 327 pounds of CO2 per megawatt hour. And depending on which option or scenario that is picked, the number changes in between. What you'll notice here is that that 20 is different. It's a little bit higher than the 1 pound. And one of the questions that might come up is, given that we might be in a similar position as we were this year, why that is. For 2024 and backwards, those emissions were calculated based on your retail sales. However, for 25 onwards, it's being calculated based on your loss adjusted load and not just your retail sales. And then on the right-hand side, on the 2027 emissions estimates, this is actually based on the hourly accounting that I discussed with earlier. And the reason why you see these ranges provided for all the scenarios is because it depends on how much short-term renewable and GHG-free energy you have and how that might show up. So we've tried to do the bookends of both, depending on where the profile might show, to try and estimate where we may land. And with that, would you go to the next slide, please? The recommendation that staff has for your board is either option 1 to select one scenario that has been presented to you, or 2 to select a range of renewable and carbon-free equivalent percentages below based on the scenario. For example, you could choose a range between scenario 1 and 5 to provide as floor and ceiling so that staff can have maximum flexibility to operate within the market and find the best possible results for the upcoming year. And with that, I'd like to open up for questions. Director Andre?
I'll have a quick, easy first question, and maybe you covered this. When you talk about banking, it's only for the accounting on the RPS. It doesn't help change what we're looking at for the carbon free. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thanks.
I think there.
Just
Raise a hand.
Oh,
I don't know.
Stephanie,
I
do
don't
you
know
want
how to.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I understand what we're saying here, because this the pounds. Did these pounds here equate to the pounds that's on the content label in the prior slide?
Yes.
So we're going to go from 1 pound, 0 or 1 pounds to 20 pounds? Are we going to see a 20 on that? I guess I just want to understand. I'm just thinking just from a kind of PR perspective, what's going to happen there?
Yes. So in the 1 pound scenario that you saw in the 2024 power content label, that's specific to light green.
That's right.
What I'm showing here in terms of the scenario, this is based on the whole portfolio, which actually looks at your loss adjusted load, which is how the actual extra tab that I talked about will be calculating your whole portfolio based off of.
Right, but okay, I know, I guess I have to dumb question me. It's like, because I would have thought that would have been the average of all, we have 4 programs. Isn't the whole load just the sum of all 4 programs? I would have assumed it would be like an average of all the things. But if we have zeros, 1, 0, 0, and 20, that's going to seem kind of weird, right?
So you're right in terms of like the averages would be the retail sales. So
Okay.
there's a loss factor that's adjusted to that increases that number. And so based off of that, that's how the 20 is being calculated based on where the status quo is.
Okay, and do we expect, because I'm way on my head around this thing, but so the state level one, so if PG&E or others have their own thing, is that number, right now it's quite high at 367. Is that going to go much higher? Is that going to go super high as well?
It would,
Like if PG&E does their power content label, is that going to say 1,000 or something like that?
it would
Or-
get to
Or whatever. I don't know. Is it going to be larger than?
Yes, it's going to be larger. And actually, as you bring out about PG&E, from 24 backwards, they were able to claim all of their nuclear as part of their power content label. However, starting in 2025 onwards, they can only claim their own share of the allocation, given that now the nuclear is being allocated based on the load shares of all the CPUC jurisdictional load serving entities. And that number is going to actually significantly drop. And we, as staff, have tried to make some estimates of where that might be. But given that we don't have the full portfolio, we can only estimate what the effect of the nuclear reduction is, and whether we don't know if they'll actually replace all of it with clean resources or some of it with clean resources. That's a decision that they'll have to make. But starting with the 2025 power content label, you'll be able to see that drop.
All right, thank you.
And if I could just clarify one thing, I think Johnny explained this well, but he had so much to say it might have gotten a little buried. There are two regulatory changes that are going to affect the power content label. One is the loss adjusted load, and that's why we're seeing the emissions go up a little bit. Am I right on that, Johnny? Okay, great. And then the other change that we'll see starting in 2028, applying to our 2027 portfolio, is the hourly reporting.
And if I may just add one more point, just for everybody's awareness, in 2024, we actually exceeded the 95% target. So that's why our emissions were really low.
Can I ask one more question on this slide? As this moves to the next step and goes to the board, I think it would be really, I'm sorry, did somebody else need to speak? Am I out of turn? Okay, I'm so sorry. If we could add a column that adds the cost of energy so that we can know where we can set our absolutes and where we can be flexible, I think it would be really helpful to have that information somehow consolidated on this slide.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
Beth asked my question, so it would be helpful to just know what the dollar per megawatt hour or whatever the right unit is, if we could see that on the slide. So when we're trying to make a decision, it'd be helpful to see. Thank you.
And then my request, we want to be, as we stated earlier in the priorities, we want to be competitive, right, in the rate for our customers. But we also want to be competitive in the energy and where we set our bar. Personally, I don't want us to diminish our mission and values here. I want it all, frankly. I want us to be competitive in the energy market in terms of purchasing it. And I'm not the expert in this area to say which is best, but what would be helpful is to have some comparisons. I just looked up as you were talking PG&E's 2024 label content, and I was like, wow, we're looking good when I did the comparison, but the comparisons aren't being provided to the board. And it's not just PG&E. I'd like to see how we compare with the other CCAs, because for me, that gives me a little bit more context of the content that we're seeing. So that would be helpful for me.
Hi, this is Vic, and thank you so much for all the questions and the thoughts. I think we are collectively moving in the right direction. That's really nice to see. So, a little bit more information on the load forecasting. So we do the analysis, a regression analysis for every single class of customer in a year for looking forward, for the fiscal year looking forward, while we rely on 10 years of historical data on how they actually behaved. We compare that with how the market behaved. And we take into account the peaks and the valleys, system conditions, gas lines blow up, very hot summers or whatever. They all go into that. So when we are doing post those analysis for our foreseeable future, please remember that a couple of years ago, we had a bundled product cost of over $100 per megawatt hour. These days is under 20. In general, if we did not do any rate reduction, and we would go with full bore as to what it is to stay clean, green, and all that stuff, we would need to procure over 500 gigawatt hours of energy. So that comes with its cost. So we will dive into further when we're talking about the rates and what have you on our budget setup. The bandwidth that some of you have been discussing, it's music to my ears, to be honest with you. It gives us some flexibility to do the best we can without choosing one that will be very difficult to match. And we will bring to you the high and the low in that bandwidth. When we talk a little bit further, we're looking into it. I hope this is helpful, just sharing some additional info.
I had a quick question relative to the bandwidth. It sounds like a bandwidth in the total cost of power and a bandwidth on the emissions is what would be useful for you. So both of those bandwidth questions.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
You're giving a preview of what we're going to hear in our next presentation. Slide 12 is going to
I wanted to
include
get
all
ahead
of
of
that
that.
info on one slide. So it's coming up.
Director Wickerson?
So I have a few questions. In terms of your priorities, look at these attribute purchases for 26, 27 versus 27, 28. Presumably your priorities are going to shift there as well, because maybe the focus this year, if you're only on 1-year contracts, is more still focusing on the annual accounting and focusing on the renewable component. But I'm just curious how your strategy, how you're thinking about that strategy as you're approaching the hourly accounting. And also whether the products that are available are changing as well, meaning there's not much use when you're talking about hourly accounting, procuring PCC1 that are an annual unshaped product. And so I'm just curious how your thinking is evolving in relation to that.
Yeah, that's actually a great question. So yes, you're right. In 2026, we're still looking at it based on annual.
Right.
And for 2027, we have begun engagements with the counterparties to figure out what's available and what's out there and how that could shift. So far, there hasn't been any products that we have found that actually aligns with the hourly accounting, and that's
Right.
just an indication that the market is not there yet. Doesn't mean to say that it won't get there. And so as we continue to engage on that, should we find SAID products or SAID solutions for that, we'll definitely be looking to engage that and do the analysis to figure out how it best fits our portfolio, just as we do with long-term contracts.
Exactly. And then in terms of the long-term contracts, presumably the prioritization there is more geothermal and hydro and batteries, because they're the things that will help you with matching your load profile and therefore the hourly match.
Geothermal is definitely high on the priority list. It's also one of the most expensive. So when it comes to balancing for that, we do, as part of the solicitations that we do for long-term contracts, is we run an optimizer to figure out, based on where we stand, what's the best fit for that year, and then take into account also what's available in the market and what are the constraints of the resources that are available in the market, because as you've had before, there's great constraints on deliverability and all that. So we put all that together to arrive at a resource or a list of resources that most likely to come online and still best fit the portfolio that we have.
Okay. And then my final question in terms of comps is anybody going to look better on an hourly basis, or everybody's going to be looking a lot worse?
That will depend on what they currently have on their portfolio and how they're able to fill the gaps, if any, that they have in the portfolio.
But I imagine the CCAs are in a worse position because they haven't procured so much long-term, they haven't got as many long-term contracts, whereas PG&E owns a lot of their assets, correct? And so do they have more, are they likely to have more flexibility? I guess that's the question. Of the IOUs in a better position than the CCAs in principle?
We would have to look at what their portfolio actually looks like, and if they've been able to sell some of the generation from that to be able to make a conclusive answer on that.
Yeah.
You have something to add?
I think we can't comment on what IOUs are going to do, but there are a couple of things that we do know about, at least about PG&E. One is that they have, and they are being able to show a lot of nuclear on their power content right now, which is not going to be the case starting as early as 2025. So unless, like Johnny said, they're replacing it with something that is equally clean, we think that emissions for them will look worse, and then obviously on an hourly accounting basis as well. Another thing that we do know is that, to your point, IOUs have lost a lot of load to CCAs, but they've still retained a lot of the generation, and the contracts that they have. So they have more flexibility in terms of what actually load serving entities can do on a power content label is that they can pick and choose what resources they show if they are over generating. So they may be holding on to resources that they can keep for flexibility, but we think that they should be optimizing their portfolio. So for compliance and for renewable content, we have already seen that PG&E was only showing 23% renewable content, which is like way less than what the state requires you to be in that particular year. So they obviously have been using banking, and they've been using other tools to optimize their portfolio. So long story short, we don't know what they're going to do. They do have significant portfolios that give them flexibility, but we also think that they would be using that portfolio to for optimization and revenue generation. So it's anybody's guess, honestly, what they're gonna and where they're gonna end up being.
Yeah.
But so that's I just wanted to provide some of these points that we can think about when we think about where they might end up.
Yeah, because it's a tension there, I assume, for the CCAs as well, in terms of the priorities of PG&E. Are they still profit maximization, and do they maximize profits by selling some of that to the CCAs who want to have a cleaner content? And so that's the tension for the CCAs as well, in terms of how much do we want ratepayers to pay for some of that, and what value is that bringing in terms of bringing new resources to the grid? Is that a fair statement?
I'm not sure. Is there a question in that? Or?
No, I was curious to know whether how you're thinking about that. Meaning, how are you thinking in terms of your priorities? I guess it's what you're looking for from the board is what are our priorities in terms of the how clean we want to be versus what price we want ratepayers to pay. That's the ultimate tension, correct?
Yes, I agree. I think we can only speculate what PG&E is going to do. I think what we can focus on is, why, like what Jamie started with, why our customers choose MCE and why they want to stay with MCE. So we can use those guiding principles to determine where we want to end up and balance cost and emissions impact. And like Johnny and Andy have already shown, there's value that short-term contracts bring in terms of emission reduction. The power content label guidelines actually don't differentiate between short-term and long-term contracts when it comes to emissions accounting. So I think that's why we try to show all those different options with estimated emissions impact, so that it becomes a little bit of an easier task for you all to balance our cost with how you want our power content label to look like. Again, like PG&E is going to do what they're going to do. We can't really speculate much. We only know that much about their portfolio.
Director Billups?
So to that end, I'm looking at slide 7, that talks about some of the short-term PPAs. I'm wondering, we've had a conversation as a board before around renewable generation asset owning, which I'm sure y'all are talked about. What are the considerations or risk around like over a long 10 to 20-year horizon, thinking about that as an option as opposed to the long-term PPAs? Or where are we at, I should ask, in terms of that conversation? Maybe it's not a conversation at all.
Yes.
Well, like,
Could you repeat the
so
question?
slide 7 doesn't suggest that we're owning assets, but you were just talking about, that I felt like Sally just mentioned this, and I'm just wondering, like, if it seems that the long-term solar PPAs are inevitable, is that something that we should, as a board, keep on the horizon over the next 10 to 20 years, thinking that that would lower the cost of energy if we just have the ownership of the renewable assets as opposed to the long-term agreements that we have? Again, it's kind of like the conversation we've had before, but I know we paused that.
Yeah, we actually have a great slide coming up in one of the upcoming presentations that's going to look at the overall cost between our long-term portfolio blended and our short-term portfolio blended.
Gotcha.
And of course, the short-term portfolio fluctuates more. The long-term portfolio tends to stay higher because we've locked in costs for a long period of time. So yeah, we'll get into that with the next presentation. And in the interest of time, we may want to pivot to the next presentation soon so we get it in before lunch. But I also don't want to cut off the questions if there are any more.
That's great. Thank you.
Are there any more questions in the room? Okay, great. Tanya, could you see if there's any online? Are there any questions online? Okay. All right, Director Lauren Scolati, please go ahead.
Hi, this is Micah Llorens-Gulari from the city of San Rafael. I'm curious, as we are looking at the rates, and I agree with it would be nice to sort of the priorities to see which ones have more weight. I'm thinking about competitive rates versus where the energy is coming from. We are making assumptions what we think our customers would like to see. Can you talk a little bit? Have you reached out to customers asking them where are the priorities or what they think MCE means to them?
Hi, Director Llorens-Gulati. This is Jamie Tuckey, and I'm happy to help respond to that question. So I would say from a customer perspective that I think keeping our light green at a minimum of 60% renewable would be really important to our brand reputation. We've been 60% renewable since 2017, so it's been almost 10 years. It's something that our customers have come to rely on. As stated earlier, we also have customers and some of your own cities and towns and counties and some very large businesses who rely on MCE's clean energy supply to help meet their climate action plans, their targets, their greenhouse gas emissions. And so I think maintaining that 60% would be really important. If we don't maintain that 60%, we'll absolutely have to do some heavy work on our marketing and messaging to customers and explain why we are backtracking on our progress towards meeting our mission. And so I think that would be an important perspective. We do know from our customers that they value the renewable energy content and the progress that we've made. We do make those statements that, since our launch in 2010 and going forward, we do have goals to become progressively cleaner. And of course, we know rates matters to customers as well. So we're juggling both of those priorities.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I think it's really important when we are having this conversation to really have that perspective. What about deep green? Will they be willing to pay more?
Would customers be willing to pay more for deep green? Is that the question?
Yeah.
More than, well, I think right now deep green is priced based on your board decision last year to adjust the cost of deep green. I think deep green is appropriately priced for the 100% renewable energy content that we're providing. And we have, the customer response to that has been positive in terms of what I would say is we haven't seen opt-outs of deep green because of the rate change.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much.
Yes.
Jamie, do you mind me just asking there, would it be useful for you guys for us to do some polls in our actual communities about what people actually think about pricing versus clean content? Because I know you say you've had feedback, but obviously you don't actually have that much interaction with regular customers. Would that be helpful for us to do some polling locally?
Sure. We'd always, I think the more information that we have from customers, the better. It's super helpful for us. And we'd be grateful for that information. So thank you for offering it. I do want to say that I think we have actually a lot of interaction with our customers through our call center for one. Any customer who looks at their bill and has a question about costs does call us, and ZAC is on the line, but we have information, and it's not just qualitative. We do track the feedback that we get from customers about why they're calling in. Is it about rates? Is it about something else? So we do have that information, and we have also done community surveys as well. When we relaunched our website, I'm trying to remember what year, I think that was 2 years ago, we did pretty extensive general polls in our communities to get feedback on their values for MCE and their utility in general. So we do have that information as well that we utilize. We're not working from a blank slate.
I believe we have one more person online.
They put their hand down, so no additional raised hand.
Okay, no additional raised hands. Thank you. We'll move on to our next item.
Thank you, everyone. We will be presenting today the proposed fiscal year MCE rate reduction proposals. My name is Maíra Strauss, CFO and Treasurer at MCE. I oversee financial planning and analysis, accounting, strategic finance, and risk management. Joining me to present this item is Kalader Bolampali, Director of Power and Analytics. He leads rates design, portfolio planning, and analytics at Kaiser Market Operations. Thank you for participating in this workshop today. I'm joining remotely as I'm under the weather and I'm missing you all in person. But please bear with me if I need to take a pause briefly at any point. So next slide, please. Next one. One more, please. Yes, perfect. So for the presentation today, we are here to provide an overview of the rate setting, focusing on big drivers and strategic choices to provide a framework for our budget setting. We have discussed the proposed rates earlier this month at the XCOM and also at the TechCom committee. Today, we're hoping to do a deeper dive into the item to help identify preferred directions for you all. The backdrop of this item is that the power supply costs have declined, and we have that this created a headroom in MCE generation rates, while at the same time, PCIe volatility continues to greatly impact customer bills. We have evaluated multiple options that balance customer relief with financial sustainability using the rate setting principles that are on your screen, and also looking at reserve and liquidity policy as our guardrails. So those are on the screen are the rate setting principles that Jamie touched briefly in her presentation. And thank you for feedback and for discussing and touching on those items today. So those principles, as we have discussed before, they might conflict with one another. While revenue sufficiency must always be met, the board has discretion in how we balance those principles. I would like to point out that other CCAs have different principles, but those are our principles that are aligned with our mission and vision, and that had steered us throughout the years up to now. And those are the lenses that we evaluate all of our rate reductions options that you see today. Next slide, please. Thank you. Now I want to briefly walk through our reserve and liquidity structure and just remind that under MCE policy, we maintain reserves equal to at least 60% of our annual energy and operating expenses. And the reserves are designed to support working capital, competitive energy procurement, compliance with loan and bond covenants, coverage of unanticipated expenses, and overall rate stability. In parallel to the policy, we manage a liquidity target of 240 days cash on hand. So on the graph, the 240 days cash on hand is the magenta line, and the bars are the projected days liquidity on hand, and the yellow line is the reserve actual as a percentage of the target. So this policy is a foundation to MCE's financial strategy, and it's very critical to maintaining favorable commercial terms with our counterparties and also supporting our strong credit ratings. In addition to our core reserves, we maintain an operating reserve fund that we are going to go in more detail later on in the presentation. So in 2025-26, based on our current projections, MCE is expected to exceed both policy targets, with reserves projected at approximately 109% of target and liquidity in about 274 days. This is for our projections, and we are trailing very well with preliminary results from our budget versus actions analysis. And this strong financial position, it's what creates the opportunity that we are discussing today. It allows us to consider meaningful generation rate reduction while still fully complying with board-adopted reserve and liquidity goals. All the options that we are going to be discussing today have been tested against these policy thresholds, and all options maintain compliance with both the 60% reserve requirement and the 240-day liquidity target. As we move into discussing options and recommendations, I want to emphasize that the conversation is about thoughtfully using the strength we've built through strong financial management, and also provide customer relief while protecting long-term stability in the subsequent years and avoiding decisions that would simply force a rate increase next year. With that, I'll pass it on to Kalader. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayra. I'll be supporting Mayra on the subsequent set of slides on the rate reduction proposals. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Before looking at the rate reductions or the upcoming fiscal year, probably makes sense to look at historically how the rates have trended and how customers have participated, with the MCE. So this slide is looking at historical generation rate, including PCIA, and comparing against PG&E, and as well as customer participation rate. So the green line shows MCE generation rate plus departed customers PCIA, and then yellow line shows PG&E's generation rate plus bundle customers PCIA, and it's in cents per kilowatt hour, and the participation rate is in percentages. Those are the bars in green, and the scale is on the right side. Yeah, and it's from years 2013 to 2025. So you can see, I think the theme which is coming out here is the green line, which is MCE rates, have been consistently lower and also steady. Doesn't mean that they're always lower. There are periods of time, especially in 2021, it's higher than PG&E, over a cent. And again in 2025, a little bit under a cent as well. But if you look at participation rate, there's actually no impact to participation rates. And there are also periods of time in 2022 where PG&E is over 2 cents higher than MCE, as well as in 2024, it's a little bit over a cent. Again, there is no change in participation rate, where probably you would expect higher participation rates coming back to MCE. Seems like this is some sort of inelasticity around customer participation from year to year price fluctuations. Okay, can you go to the next slide, please? So carrying that trend, I know there's some good feedback which we got from prior XCOM, TechCom. So we added this slide here around customer participation and cost sensitivity. So as we've seen in the prior slide, despite periods of higher rates, customer participation, it tend to remain strong. And just as a snapshot, since 2025, MCE generation plus PCIA have been higher than PG&E's, but the participation rates still at an all-time high, a little bit over 87%. And even on the number of customer accounts, I think that's the highest we have now, 603K, a little bit over. And opt-outs historically been low. And there's also one more thing, which is kind of playing around, probably takes short-term price fluctuations. Customer participation rate immune to short-term price fluctuations because of, there's something called transition bundle service. I'll get to that in the next slide. But customers who opt out must decide to stay with MCE or any CCA for 6 months, or take PG&E's inflated transition bundle service rate, which is often, floats with the market, very volatile. It's, often 2 to 3 times of standard rate. Okay. So key takeaway really from the prior slide is customers appear to value long-term stability, sustainability, and program benefits, and not just short-term price fluctuations. And again, affordability remains a core priority, which is supported by our bill discount programs and customer programs for financially vulnerable customers. Okay, can we move to the next slide, please? Okay, so a little bit more about transition bundle service. So PG&E switching limits, as we put it here. Again, customers opting out of CCA have 2 choices. They can give 6 months notice and stay with CCA for that period and then transition to PG&E, or they can return to PG&E immediately. If they opt out without any notice, 6 months notice, those customers are placed on PG&E's transition bundle service for 6 months. So under TBS, transition bundle commodity prices, cost or rates apply. And that's called TBCC. TBCC, again, is highly volatile. As I said before, It's often 2 to 3 times of standard rates. It's actually tied to CAISO market prices, which again, there is a daily price, they use a 5-minute price and a 15-minute price, but they take an average for the week. So that's why it fluctuates weekly with CAISO market prices. And the range to keep an eye in the last few years is anywhere from 14 to 30 cents per kilowatt hour. And we look at standard generation rates, it's roughly around 12 cents to put things in perspective. And also, original PCIe vintage applies to these customers who are placed on TBS. So after 6 months, only after serving in TBS for 6 months, the customers move to bundle generation plus PCIe, followed by a 6-month PG&E lock-in. Going on to the next slide. Okay, so then looking at our principles, which we have covered quite a bit during today's session, and also looking at customer behavior from historical rate setting, how rates have trended. So keeping all that in, what should be our strategy for upcoming fiscal year? Again, the simple message comes out is at the end of the day, we need to balance cost with competitiveness and long-term customer retention. Again, there's always a tension through cost. As a good business, we at least need to set our floor to recover our costs for our long-term financial stability. I think that's a basic tenet of any business. Again, we have guardrails, which are like our reserve policy, which Myra touched on. I think we should align with those reserve policies to have better credit ratings, which can help with our contracting with good terms and conditions. Again, on the other side, we have competitiveness and the retention. And again, we often talk about price, but price is one of the several dimensions where we provide compelling customer value proposition, right? So retention, as we can see from the history, it's influenced by more than price. It's how cleaner we are, greener we are, and what programs we serve. And historically, are we able to provide stable and often lower rates? And more importantly, how's the long term looking? What value proposition we can provide? And the key takeaway again there is 1 year price differentiation is an anomaly or a trend, right? If it's just a short term price fluctuation, should we overreact to it, not putting our principles ahead, or should we look at future trend and continue with our good financial principles for long-term sustainability of the business? Moving on to the next slide. Okay, so now given the upcoming year, obviously PG&E's rates are lower and we are slightly higher than PG&E rates. And what tools we have really in our arsenal to provide some relief to our customers without really putting our financial stability at risk. So these are some of the tools we have come up with. And the first one is the obvious one, is a rate reduction headroom. Our rates, the current rates, if we sustain into the next fiscal year, we do end up with making more money than our cost, which is roughly 89 million. So we can forego that additional net revenue to align our revenues with cost. So that can create a room to reduce our rates, at least to a floor of our cost. So beyond that, we do have operating reserve fund, also rate stabilization fund up to 70 million. It's exactly 70 million. We can use that for targeted rate relief. And after that, we do have reserves, but we don't want to tap into reserves. Or we can tap into reserves to a point where we are still in alignment with our liquidity and reserve policy. So we can unlock roughly 24 to 36 million without putting our resource liquidity targets at risk. And then finally, against the theme of the prior presentation, if we reduce our clean energy procurement targets up to state mandated requirements, we can unlock up to 17 million, which can again go towards reducing cost and hence creating room to lower our rates. So in total potential rate relief, a little bit over 200 million is what we have to play with. And we got to make a decision how much we need to tap into this relief, potential rate relief, and how we can reduce rates and who we should reduce the rates to. Right, going to the next slide. Okay. Again, as a summary, these are the 5 options we have come up with, proposed generation rate reduction options. Again, kind of bookends, not necessarily saying, I know there were a few questions around, do we have to pick any of these options? But I think there is flexibility, but I tend to look at it as bookends. Starting from option 1, if we reduce our rates by 1.73 cents, again, it's a break-even point where our under recovery is exactly 0, meaning our revenue, we would forecast to generate enough revenue to recover our cost. So in that instance, our bill impact without PCIA, purely looking at generation rates compared to bundle customers, we would still be higher by $1. But if you take PCIA into account, our customers would pay roughly $22 more than bundle customers. I think option 2 is again one more point where if you reduce our rates by 2 cents, a little bit over 2 cents. I know we got a precise number here. It basically brings our rates into parity with PG&E generation rates. We adjusted it slightly to kind of get that parity from our earlier presentations. That means that we would be running a deficit of 17 million in that option, but we do have operating reserve fund up to 70 million, so 17 million we just need to tap, partially into operating reserve fund. And that's what brings parity with PG&E. That's why bill impact without PCIA is exactly 0 or equal. But if we take PCIA into account, our customers would be $21 above bundle customers. So you can see a swing of $21, even at a parity. Now, if you go to option 3, again, just dropping our rates by 1 more cent, we would almost fully exhaust our operating reserve fund because we would be running a deficit of 67 million. But if you look purely by generation rates, we would be cheaper by $4. But if you take PCIA, still expensive by $17 on a typical monthly bill. Again, option 4 is again one more break-even point where we would be fully exhausting our operating reserve fund plus that roughly 24 to 36 million of reserve-backed funding. So we can give relief up to a little bit over 3.5 cents per kilowatt hour. In that instance, customer bills, purely looking at generation rates, MCE would be cheaper by $7. Include PCIA, would be coming in above by $14. And the last one really takes into account, full operating reserve fund, reserve-backed funding, and if we lower our clean energy procurement, so we could offer up to 4-cent relief. That means that we would have to give up under recovery at a deficit of 120 million roughly. In that instance, again, we would be cheaper by $9 without PCIA. With PCIA, would be expensive by $12. Okay. Again, kind of bookends, just taking in our principles around reserves and liquidity policy and trying to recover our cost. Sets our business for long-term sustainability. Okay. Going to next slide, please. We went in detail around these scenarios in the prior presentation. Just as a recap, again, on the reducing clean energy procurement scenarios, we do have 1 to 7 kind of bookends again. And option 7 being, RPS banking and the cost savings, we are looking at 17 million in 26-27 and 27-28, roughly 21 million. Probably not go into detail because we have went in detail in the prior presentation. Okay, moving on to next slide, please. Okay. Again, this one is kind of showing not the reductions per se, but also includes where our rates would be. Just to run through the chart quickly here, you do have, these are purely generation rates, no PCIA, and then we do have 2025 and 2026. So 2025, green bars are MCE, blue bars are PG&E. You can see purely looking at generation rate, MCE is a lot cheaper than PG&E in 2025. Now in 2026, PG&E lowered their generation rates as well to 12.57. Currently, MCE rates are 14.62. And then we see different option 1 to 5 here, and what is the deficit we would be running in the small table above, and the source we would be getting to close that deficit. So option 1, again, slightly expensive on generation, even after 1.73 cents, but that's our cost recovery, break-even point for cost recovery. So option 2 is, like I said, it brings our generation rates into parity with PG&E's. It's 12.57. And option 3 would be 11.62, 3 cents lower. Option 4, 11 cents, a little bit over 11 cents. Option 5, 10.62. I know there's a slide coming up. What does it really mean from a customer bill perspective? But just wanted to give a snapshot of how our generation rates would be in different options. Okay, going into next slide. In this slide, we tried to show, very similar to prior slide, is just that we added PCIA into the mix here. Again, if you see 2025, including PCIA, MC's generation rates plus PCIA is expensive than PG&E by roughly 7 cents, 7.7 cents. Going into 2026, PG&E Gen plus PCIA drops to a little bit over 11.5. And currently MCE, because of PCIA, I think we are 18.28. But you can see a line running across showing that option 2, if we pick, we would still be expensive by 4.67. I think there's a table at the top showing how much MCE effective rate would be, how much it would be higher than PG&E. Option 3 slowly starts making a dent into PCIA. Option 4 and 5, really, that's where we chip away at PCIA by reducing our generation rates further down, than PG&E's. Okay, going into next slide. I think this, again, based on the feedback, I think we got this slide here. Makes sense. What does this rate impact mean from a customer bill perspective? Again, just to run through this table quickly here. We have PG&E here in blue and MCE light green for 2025 as well as 2026, current and option 1 to 5. We picked residential ETUSC because it represents most of our customers, and the generation rate, PG&E delivery rate, and PG&E PCIA and franchisee fees, and the total energy costs in $1 per kilowatt hour, and an average monthly bill for a typical customer. So for PG&E for 2026, it would be around $154. And if you look at 2025 MCE light green customers, it's actually at $192. And then based on current rates, MC typical customer bill would be $183. So it would be expensive by $29. You can see the difference column or row, which would mean we would be roughly 19% expensive, or we are 19% expensive than PG&E. But the interesting comparison is also against 2025. Actually, customer bills are going down from where customer rates are from the last year, right? From 192 in 2025 to 183 to the current. Then option 1 to 5, really, I think you can see it's $20 swing. Option 1 expensive by $22, a little bit, yeah, and then option 2 expensive by $20 compared to PG&E, and 16 option 3, option 4 $14 expensive, and option 5 $12 expensive. In percentage terms, you can see, I think the option 2, which brings MCE's generation rates into parity, we would be expensive by 13%. Again, the point to note here is what would customers pay if they opt out of MCE without any notice period. I think that based on TBCC rate range, it would typically range from 180 to 250, which is 16% to 50% higher than PG&E standard bundle rates. So there is that element of this TBS probably playing into customers' inelasticity. Going into next slide. And this is again rate comparison, not just a bill comparison, to show how generation rates have evolved from historically. Like we have two snapshots, 26 and also 2012. On the left side we have MCE, and the right side we have PG&E, and really three components. Generation is in green, in yellow is in T&D, and PCIA is in gray. So if you look at MCE 2627 under option 2, which kind of brings MCE generation rates into parity with PG&E generation rates. So it's the real difference is really PCIA, which swings a little bit over 4.5 cents, right? Because our customers pay 3.66 as a charge, but bundle customers get a credit of 1 cent. That's a swing of 4.6, a little bit over 4.6. But if you look at 2012, PCIA is actually converged. I mean, to some extent in the history too. And we're cheaper, we're slightly cheaper than PG&E generation rates and distribution rates. It's a little bit over 11 cents. But the trend probably we want to show here is T&D side, the costs have more than doubled. The generation is a little bit under double compared to where we are in the history in 2012. Right. So lion's share of the cost for the customers on the bill comes from T&D side of the shop. Okay, moving on to the next slide. Again, interesting slide. This is where we want to bring together the point of, hey, is it an anomaly in 2026 the rates are going so low for PG&E, or is it a trend? So, and if we look at history from 2013 to 2025, in this chart, we're including 26 PG&E rates and where MCE rates would be under various scenarios. And from 27 to 29, based on PCIA projections, and based on our cost-based rates, where would our rates be compared to PG&E rates? Right. So I think we rely on industry. We rely on NewGen strategies and solutions. It's an entity which works with PG&E under confidentiality agreement to aggregate PCIA level information, and they put out projections. And we have seen the entire deck, the biggest pain point is the PCIA. That's the big difference. Our generation rates are not that different. It's just the PCIA for 2026. But from 2027 plus, the data shows that PCIAs across vintages are expected to converge. There were questions on how confident we are on that. I think it's a two-part question. They would be expected to. There's high confidence that they would converge, given that in 2026. PG&E is trying to recover their undercollection from 2025 and also retroactive rate making aspects of it. But the other question is how far they would converge. So right now projections show they would converge to less than 1 cent. would there be 1 cent or 2 cent is the only question. Probably, we are unsure of, but we are just relying on the projections from the industry experts. And also looking at, so you can see on the chart all the options in 2026 converge from 2027 to 2029. That's because in option 1 and 2, our generation rates remain stable and we don't need to increase those rates. But in option 3 and 5, we give more discount on our rates. But because PCIA is going to expect it to come down, we would have to increase our rates. So net, they all would converge to option 1 and 2. But the nuance there is if we pick any of the options other than 1 and 2, we would have to increase our generation rates. But for customers, because PCIe would come down, they probably net out, keeping the line flat in alignment with the option 1 and 2. Okay. The next slide, please. So with that, I'll hand over to Myra to carry us towards the end of the day.
Thank you, Cal. So in this slide, again, we have a reserve and liquidity with 2000 starting in the first bar with the 24-25 results, and then projections for this current fiscal year, and laying out all the options that Cal had discussed. So on the green bars, we have the projected days liquidity on hand. The magenta line is the target days liquidity on hand, and the yellow one is the reserves actual percentage of target. So I'm giving you a few seconds here just to digest everything that Kyle said and putting those options into perspective into a reserve and liquidity outlook. Seeing that all of those current estimates and options that we have, they all meet reserve and liquidity, but I want you to take a moment and digest that before we move to the next slide, please, where we can have all of the options, a summary of the all of the options, with the second column, the generation rate reduction, and then the last one being the impact. So I'll give you another moment to digest that, and then we will open for questions and comments.
Maida, this is Catalina. Since you and Cal are both virtual, I'm happy to help facilitate some questions here in the room. And I think probably the easiest would be to start with the first row and just go on down. Dr. Painter, would you like to start us off?
I'd be happy to start off. Thank you for the presentation. I hope you can hear me. My question, I mean, obviously we're looking at, and I think Director Alessio said it really well, we want it all, right? We want to be able to maintain our high standards. We also want to give our customers the best rate. This may or may not be an option, but this is my question, and that is, could we look at two scenarios where one is a rate reduction that is permanent, and then a second rate reduction that is maybe just for 1 year, that would be intended for 1 year to bring down the overall impact of PCIA without having to come back and raise rates, where we're transparent to the public that we're looking at, I'll just throw an example out, a 4-cent rate reduction, 2 cents being a long-term permanent rate reduction, and the other 2 cents a short-term adjustment based on the significant increase from PCIA. Is that enough?
Absolutely, yes. And we could do that. I just also want to remind folks that why we need to balance affordability to our customers and our financial strength. When we more deeply into our reserves beyond our costs, our base cost rate, we also have to be looking into other consequences for that, such as our credit rating, impact on our credit rating, which would directly impact collateral that we have with all of our counterparties. So this is something that we also have to consider when using an option that's deeply discounted. But yes, we can set a discount for now and then review it throughout the year as we go. Kyle, would you like to add anything?
No, thank you, Myra. Good question. I think all the options do kind of set up that way, Director. When you think about it, I think option 1 and 2 are mostly based on cost-based. So those tend to be sustainable without have to, drop in the rates or fluctuate our generation rates with time. And option 3, 4, 5, even if we select anywhere, need not be exactly 3, 4, 5, anywhere from option 2 to 5, because you can have that variability. Those should be a temporary relief because we would be exhausting our, rate stabilization funds. And the messaging, if we were to pick any options other than 2, the messaging would be our generation rates. It's only a temporary relief. It's expected to go high next year, but they would be offset from PCIA, which would, put us on par at least with what we have right now in option 1 and 2. Hopefully.
Yeah, and just to be clear, the reason I'm asking about that is to, as you already said, to look at how we protect our operating fund and reserves. I think that is really critical. But also as we present whatever option we choose as a board to the public, that we're clear about a portion being, having not having a sunset at this point, but in a portion being temporary, if you will. And to me, that helps us avoid coming back and saying we're raising our rates in the future. We're simply being clear at this point that a portion is for a very short term. So if that's an option, that's good to know. Thank you.
Great, thank you. A couple of questions here. One is, I guess I have, if we can go back to slide 6, if that's possible. I guess you said the key takeaway from our kind of our historical pricing is that customers value long-term stability, sustainability, and program benefits. I have a completely different takeaway from that slide. So there might be other data that's not there. What I see is our customers our customer retention is incredibly inelastic. In fact, over the last 8 years, I just did my little table. PG&E's been higher 4 times. We've been higher 3 times. There's been one over the last 8 years that we've pretty much been the same. And I see pretty much no difference in participation rates. So that actually tells me that kind of gives us, absence of a survey, which I actually think from Director Wilkins is a fantastic idea. That's not the takeaway I get. But that being said, I do think rate reduction is important because we are a community partner. We are in touch with our customers because we're a community, partner. And I think, if there's an affordability crisis and we do need to, look at lowering rates to help people. But I guess it does not look to me, number one, that we're all that stable. And number two, that I think we have, I don't think it's worth putting our financial house in jeopardy thinking we're going to lose customers. Because I think, unfortunately, over the last 8 years, it's completely clear that we have a very sticky kind of customer base. I just want to put that out there. Just a thought but I think the end result is the same. I agree we need a rate reduction. I question the takeaway.
Yeah, I think it's on slide 7.
Right. The second question I have is I'm unclear. We go back to slide 11. I don't understand how slides 11 and 12 match because slide 11, if we look at option 5, where you say we are going to lower our clean energy procurement, we're projecting a $26 million savings, right?
Yes.
27 million. If I look at the next slide, we talk about the different options. I don't see a $27 million option there.
Good question. So that's because when our cost goes down, our liquidity target is a percentage, like let's just say 240 days, it goes down as well. So that would unlock a little bit from the reserves without having to go dip below our targets, if that makes sense.
Okay, but which scenario number did you assume to give us our pricing option number 5 above?
Number 7.
So you went that's basically the maximum.
Exactly. So if you were here, good clarification. if you have to do option 5, you have to go at the bottom. We have to do a scenario 7 in this case.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you. So then I guess my final comment, I guess, or question would be, I think if we go back to our key priorities and what we stand for, it feels like because it's going to be, and we're looking at kind of a one-time rate relief, because we talked about, because that's the way our rate reduction fund works, and we anticipate the rates converging next year anyway. I really would oppose anything that changed our energy mix, because if one of our key priorities is we're going to be the greenest around, then changing our energy mix for a one-time rate reduction feels completely counterproductive, because it looks like we can get the vast majority of relief just from using the ORF, which is what it's there for, right? So that would be my thought, is like, let's use that. If we go to maximum 27 million, which is a small percentage of the 100 million we could potentially get, and we lose our credibility and our principles around the energy mix, that doesn't seem like a trade-off worth having, because we're still going to be more expensive than PG&E for this 1 year. So I think we do a goodwill effort through ORF so we can give some relief. We tell customers we're doing this, because we feel they're paying the affordability crisis, but we're keeping to our key principles about the energy mix. So anyway, that's all I have. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you and the entire staff, really. There's been a lot of time and effort put into all this work to generate these slides for us. That doesn't just happen. So thank you for the work that's brought us to this moment. Some really good comments have already been made by Member Painter and Member McCormick. It's given me a lot to think about. I think as I make, policy decisions and budget decisions, both as an elected and then in the nonprofit world where I'm on boards, there's cost and there's value. What is the cost and what is the value of that cost or the cost reduction here? And that's, I think, was Member McCormick is just kind of saying, is it really worth it? I think if we could find a compromise here, that would be great. I want us to be, I think the financial, stability is critical to what we need to balance here, along with our mission, vision, and the principle set. I really appreciate the thoughtfulness of the balance costs with competitiveness and the long-term customer retention. This is a very difficult decision, I think, as a board member, because I'm not, as I said before, I'm not an expert in energy and renewable energy and the market and how that changes short-term, long-term. I'm a student at this at best. I am curious, though, because I've heard that PG&E is going to be, well, they're hoping to increase their prices if CPUC gives them the go-ahead, starting in 2027 to 2023, and those would be annual price hikes if they're given that permission. So we're looking, and they may not get what they want, but looking at this dip and looking at the trend, because it does seem like an anomaly where they're dropping so much lower and we're higher. I'm looking at what's 27, 28, 29 through 30 going to look like as we make this decision here. I think so I want to keep that in mind. We don't know what that's going to be. We don't have the crystal ball, but I do know that they are looking for a pretty substantial rate increase if they get the permission to do so. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think so. The rate increases which PG&E, I think, proposing in their GRC, general rate case, is more on the T&D side, Director. So we know definitively on the T&D side, PG&E rates are going higher. So what we don't know is on the generation side, would they be higher or lower? Because it kind of goes on a different track where that's why they're volatile too compared to our rates. They set the rates, they try to recover their cost to the rates, but if they're balanced, it's a balancing account. If it's over or under certain 4 to 5% range, they try to reset the rates again. So that we don't have information on. It's kind of hard to uh, forecast that one. But what really helps us is that PCIe converging, right? Because usually our generation rates at or below PG&Es historically, because our cost of procurement, I think we're able to keep it low. But PCIe converging is a good sign for us going into next year, which would help us.
Thank you. That's helpful to know too. I just, I think just moving forward, we have a lot of folks here that want to say something, and we have lunches coming in. So, um, I just think that we need to be, again, I think balance is a really important word here, and having the foresight of being prudent financially, um, sticking to our mission and what makes us unique and why people come to MCE, I think is really important. And then really looking at that cost value comparison. The other thing is kind of obvious, but there's two ways you generate money, and that is increase revenue and reduce expenses. So I don't know if there's any bandwidth on either one of those. The other would be reducing the community benefit, which is, I think you said it's almost $6 million, $5.9 million. But as somebody who's been on the Climate Action Committee in Napa County for 6 years, I know that the MCE funds that are infused in the programs in our county really have a greater return. I mean, it's an investment that creates a boost. And there's a greater return of that investment that comes in because of the boost and the MCE grant. So, we could go there for a year. It's not going to make that big of a dent as when we look at how much money that we need to make any kind of ripple effect. But just some thoughts. I'll pass it on. Thank you.
Thank you. And I appreciate the presentation. It's really great conversation and just giving us a lot to think about, and just sharing what my colleague just shared. I agree with the community benefit. I don't think it's going to make that big of a difference, and it's something that has really helped our counties and cities out a lot. And then just going in, the only thing I could keep thinking about as we were going through the presentation and looking at whether or not we go take a deeper dive when we look at our reserves to be more competitive with PG&E. And it's like, but we also want to remain like fiscally responsible as well. And so we have had this good credit rating. And I mean, just going right back to our values, people or customers are with us because of the cleaner energy. And so we're not losing customers. And so it's like, how much do we want to, look into our reserves? So we want to remain competitive, but I wouldn't want to go too far deep in our reserve where it's going to change our credit ratings.
Thanks. And thanks for everything. So I wanted to start with a question. So it sounds like option one uses the 89 million in headroom that we talked about at the very beginning. That's where that change comes from. And then the next changes are just what proportion of the 70 million in the operating reserve fund happens. Okay. And then thinking about Director Painter's discussion of kind of bundling some things together, is it possible when we look at the rates because one of our core values is equity and taking care of customers who are most vulnerable. And I think for many of us in the room, a $20 change in our PG&E bill, yeah, whatever. But we do have customers for whom that will be big. Can we pair something like expansion or continuation of the CARES credit as part of rate setting, just saying this is an important tool to make sure that our rate is equitable?
Director Darling, I'm so glad you're touching on those 2 points. So after this item, we are going to discuss the budget, and I had planned to talk more about those, but I'm happy to give a quick spoiler. So that would be our cost relief program that we had at 5 million this year. And in March, your board can propose can approve an amount for the following year, then I increase the amount or whatever we decide on it. So I'm really glad you're pointing on those items. And the ORF deposit, our operating rate relief reserve, sorry. We will also be, I'll be talking more about possible additional deposit from this current fiscal year, which we are looking into some positive results. So I'll be discussing that more in the other presentation, but thank you so much for bringing this
Great.
right now.
And I think many of my fellow directors have touched on protecting our financial stability and continuing with our commitment to clean energy, and I support that.
Perfect. Thank you.
So Maida, the first thing, as we discussed in the Finance Committee, you're expecting to be able to have about $30 million extra, correct, to put into the operating reserve fund if it's not allocated to other things which you've just described.
Yes. Director Wilkinson, I'm sorry, I missed the amount that you said.
Did you say we'll be putting about 30 million into the operating reserve fund at the end of this fiscal year? Was that
we'll have to wait until we close the year and then amend the policy, but we could between 15 or 30 million dollars, depending on how we end the year. So this will be a discussion, but we can only decide on the amount after we close the books for the year, which will be 4 months after the year actually closes. So we can't decide on the amount while we set the budget. We'll talk about it. We have projections, and we'll talk about what can it be and how can we amend the policy. But the actual deposit, we can only discuss in
Understood.
the fall. Yeah.
Okay. But the reserve and liquidity outlook that you provide on slide 18, it'd be good if you could put that up. That does not include this potential up to $30 million that we might be putting into into reserves, into the operating reserve. So that would affect the cash on hand. So I guess here's my main point here. We're all worrying about financial stability for the agency, but even in your most aggressive rate cutting scenario, you are exceeding all of your targets, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And we're not right now, so we'll be in a situation where we're actually in a better position even after these rate cuts than we are on the basis of the 24-25 results. So I think that's just an important point for the board to reflect on, that we are in, even with your most aggressive rate cut, that still leaves us in an incredibly good financial position. So I think that's an important point for people to reflect on. The second point is, I know you've talked about the inelasticity of our consumer base, and that's definitely been the case historically, but the rate gap is going to be much more significant than we've ever seen based on that slide that you showed before. I think even in the most aggressive rate cutting scenario, we're at like a 3-cent gap, where the most we've had before is about a 1.2-cent gap. So that's a significant amount. And whilst hearing what you're saying about customers being sticky because of the transition to PG&E, which makes a lot of sense to me, the customers that I'm worried about, and again, we mentioned this in the Finance Committee meeting, are the bigger customers, the agricultural, the commercial, the industrial. And I'd like to understand what share of our load they are, because I can see how they could get picked off by PG&E, and then you could get into this vicious cycle of losing load and still having fixed costs, and that having really significant ramifications. So one thing I would certainly like to see, if depending what rates, or regardless of which rate scenario we select, is much more regular reporting of opt-outs, and not just this weird statistic, but the actual hard data in terms of how many customers we have, what our load is, and what that is showing on a very regular basis, because it would be important to have a strategy in place if we do start to lose load, as to how we're going to respond to that, whether through rate cuts or some other strategies. So I think that's just a piece that we need to consider. And then in relation to the, how much do we spend on attributes or not? I guess my perspective there is, I guess I have some ambivalence around attribute purchases because of the discussions we've had about whether they actually create new projects, additionality, etc. But I absolutely understand that if they're cheap, then that makes sense to do that for public perception purposes, climate action plans, all those different reasons. But I guess I'd like to understand, I think the discussions we've had and that Viken's sort of encouraging is setting a cap on how much you can spend. Seems to make the most sense to me, regardless of what that means in terms of the ultimate percentage that we report. Because if you're saying that our customers are completely sticky, regardless of price, then I would suggest that they're probably completely sticky regardless of that basket that we're reporting on an annual basis. Most customers who aren't struggling with budget are just paying their bill, and they're not paying any attention to any of this stuff. But there are customers that are really sensitive to budget, and they're the ones that I worry about. And it's not just the ones that do qualify for the fairer credit. There's a whole bunch of people above that level who don't qualify, but they struggle to make ends meet. And I think we really have a duty to them to get rates down as much as possible whilst meeting our targets. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Director Wilkinson. That was one of my things I wanted to bring up, was just our type of customer that we have, residential versus commercial. So I'm sure most people have heard of the 80-20 rule. It would sure be nice to know what our biggest customers are and who is buying most of the power. Is it all the commercial people that we have? I think residential people, like everybody has said before me, they're going to get it no matter what. If we're $5 higher, $5 cheaper, it's not going to make a big difference. So I would love to see just a little bit more information on the commercial versus residential on that. Just a couple other just quick little things on the PCIA rates that we see now that have gone up tremendously. Is there anything that might happen in the future where they might come back down, they might adjust? Because it seems like that's where the biggest amount of the difference on the bill is on the PCIA. So I don't know if you have any input on that.
Yeah. So our projections slide kind of show that, Director. I know we're including both generation and PCIA. So this year, PCIA divergence is a reflection of multitude of aspects. One being how PCIA is computed. I think that has changed in 2025. CPUC did a PCIA reforms that for example, the price of resource adequacy in a prior regime was like $40 to $50 per kilowatt month. It has come down to like $10, $11. So a scale of that dropping by, I don't know, 400, 300% in price led to under recovery of PCIA costs for PG&E and also over recovery from their customers. And because of retroactive rate making, all the 2025 under collection being pushed into 2026, rate setting by PG&E. So you would see almost twice or thrice impact, more than double impact coming into 1 year. But that would go away from 2027. That is for fact. So there would not be any double collection for under collection coming from 2026. There may be some over or under, but not to the magnitude, which is roughly over $2 billion coming into 2026. So there is certainty that PCIA would converge, and the industry projections show that they would converge from roughly 4 to 5 cents right now to 1 cent. So they obviously, that's again a projection. there is uncertainty. Would that be 1 cent convergence or 2 cents convergence? It depends on market conditions and what's the value of the PCIA portfolio at that point. But there is confidence that it would converge, and our policy team too kind of working in the back. Obviously there is a legal case. There's an appeal filed on retroactive rate making even for 2025 and the collection going into 2026. Plus, I think there's a constant reforms happening at CPUC. Our policy advocacy groups have been, trying to get this PCIA volatility being taken away. I think we can't just live with this sort of uncertainty around PCIA. But yeah, work being done on that front.
Okay, thanks. And I've just one other thing. Last slide on number 19. On the third option, the 3-cent decrease, you have on there that says rate increase will likely needed for fiscal year 27-28. So are you saying that if we give them a 3-cent decrease on the price, that next year the odds are we're going to have to raise the rates again?
Good question. I think it's around how the messaging would be. If we drop to 3 cents, what we're saying is that the 2 to 3 cent relief, that 1 cent really, is temporary relief, right? Because we would be dipping below our cost at that point. So we would have to raise our rates from 3 cents, just to take the numbers what we have, from 3 cents to at least 2 cents back up, right? We can't sustain a 3-cent rate drop going into future years, because for option 3, 4, and 5, really we are using operating reserve fund, which we would have exhausted in the upcoming year if we were to use those. So we don't have that reserve fund to kind of give similar relief in the future years. So the generation at least has to go slightly up to be at, cost based at minimum.
Okay. So if we end up doing that, the only way we could continue the 3-cent decrease is by buying power at a lower price or lowering our expenses.
That is correct. To an extent, that's also because we are hedging on a forward basis, right? We're not leaving our portfolio exposed. We even for the next year, we would have closed some positions. We might have some open positions. Again, probably it's a sensitive information to disclose, but not all of it is flexible to drop. Yeah. But to an extent, if load doesn't show up, we can always liquidate if you have long positions going into KISO market. So
okay,
on the energy side, at least.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate all the work that went into the presentation.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, and echo, of course, the great work that the staff has done and the work that went into the analysis and presentation of the slides. It's incredibly helpful. And of course, trying to balance the considerations about what makes MCE unique in the provision of power to our customers and why they choose us. And totally agree that what Liz said about, at the root of it, it's increasing revenue and reducing expenses, right? I mean, that's why we're here. One of the things I think that we all do in the other towns that we serve as electeds, towns and regions that we serve, is that, when you do comparisons with other similarly situated entities, right? So we always do that in the town that I serve in Sausalito's. We always look at other towns and who we're competing with for resources, right? So what I think would be helpful is that we look at other CCAs, right, for all of our costs, right? And so as we head into this review. And I think that's just incredibly helpful. We also try to set policy considerations as a board on how we're going to move forward. And so it's helpful that I sit at the end of this row because I got to hear everybody before I made my comments. And so, and I can incorporate those into my feedback that I'm giving, in addition to the feedback that we heard from the staff, which was incredibly great presentation. So, I think when we look at, the presentations and the suggestions, those were great options. And so when we get down to the decision making,
I think we're looking at those, and especially when we're going to start delving into costs, and we're looking at, okay, is there some options, and we're looking at costs across the board, um, reducing expenses, and increasing revenue. How can we do that? So I think that you have to look at those, right? As we're moving forward. And then in being fiscally responsible, how do we do that? And we look at what the reserve, and are we going to pull from that reserve for a year or two in order to reduce rates, going forward? And totally understand about customer retention, but what does that look like in this unique environment? And, to Director McCormick's points, I think, those were really, really valid points as well. But is this a unique and different type of customer? And that I don't know. And I want to delve into that as well, because it is sort of a strange customer that we have, and totally want to look at what type of the difference between the commercial and the residential customers, and why do customers stick with us so long, even though our rates are higher? And when we're talking about the meticulous nature about the descriptors and how we describe our power, I think that's incredibly important with MCE, and why people choose us because of how we present ourselves to the public. And that's why they stay with us. And the credibility of this board and MCE and how we present ourselves to the public is also incredibly important. And in maintaining that credibility is also why people choose us as their power source. And so that's really important, I think, to us as a board. And so that's a unique proposition for us moving forward. So these are all things that are unique to us as a business entity in an odd way that's different from most for-profit companies that we have to remember as we move forward, and that's part of our decision-making process. So those are my unique comments today. Thank you so much.
All right, I think to move us along, Dr. Nakamura, do you want to just start it? If anybody has any comments, being mindful we have time, or we have public comments online that we still have to make time for, lunch and one more presentation, but appreciate everybody making their comments.
Yeah, thank you. I did see Zay Perrin. You had your hand up a second ago. Did you have something to add?
Yeah, I think I just wanted to bring light to the conversation about opt-outs and understanding there. I think that Director Wilkinson was commenting on a past presentation where we talked about the differentiation between opt-outs and opt-outs where my team is able to contact customers, and that differentiation between our retention levels. So just for clarity, our current opt-out rate as a full opt-out rate is less than 0.5%. To give you an idea, that means last month we had a total of 336 opt-outs from our total population of over 603,000 customers. So when we talk about stickiness, part of that is in there. When we talk about the elasticity, there is a range that we have experience with, and that range is between $10 to $14 at that 1.5 to 2.5 cent range of a premium, where we've been able to have the conversations with customers, have the education with customers, and retain them based off of everything that everyone has talked about the value of MCE. So from our experience, if we're able to keep that type of range, then we can successfully retain our customers. And when we add on the CARES credit option and possibility, recognizing that it's currently at a $20 per person credit, looking at those options, it puts us at parity or better than parity for our most vulnerable customers. And we do have the information when it comes to our non-residential versus residential. And we can also look at and talk to you all about their sticking points and what's important for them. Because there's also differentials when we talk about their use rate, what rate they are on, and how those differentiations change a little bit. So we can get into all of that, but I just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page when it comes to opt-outs and what we're seeing and what we're hearing at the call center, because we do get a lot of those responses of, okay, you are a little bit more expensive or more expensive, but we see the value in that, so we're going to stay.
So Zay, can I just request that, because some of the other CCAs just provide a standard monthly report as part of their board meeting that just has all of the data on opt-outs, and that would just be great to track given the price cap. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad I saw your hand up, Zay. That was important information. My comments are brief. A lot of the comments that have already been made resonate with me. I lean conservative on leaning in any use of our reserves. Changing rates for customers is if we're going to have to make up for it in a future year, I don't think that it would be worth it to us. If we want to keep the stable nomenclature in the values of our organization, dropping rates just to knowing that we might have to raise them again doesn't make sense to me. But I think I really appreciate the conversation and the presentation today. Thank you.
Okay, I'm really stuck here because I'm in a different situation where Pittsburgh does MCE supplies power to Pittsburgh Power, and we provide the service for the people and for our infrastructure that we have in Pittsburgh. Again, a lot of these topics were touched on about keeping the rates low, and keeping, as a lower rate power company. And as well as, I'm concerned about the clean energy targets that we have. And we have, it's like either one or the other, we're losing it. I have to look toward the future because we have a lot of future prospects for Pittsburgh that will be using the energy from Pittsburgh Power. So I'm kind of stuck. It's a very difficult situation for me. And I'm just... I'm just letting you know that I am I have to figure out the balance for it. So because I'm in a unique situation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to staff for your presentations. It seems to me that this is a really unique time in terms of the change in the PCIA fees and also how PG&E is changing its transmission and delivery fees. If you look back at the chart where you show the historical, the two lines of our rates versus PG&E's rates, I mean, the historical, gap hasn't been as large as it is now. And so as we're thinking about customer stickiness or inelasticity of demand, I just want people to keep that in mind, that the gap here is pretty significant, and it deviates, pretty significantly from what historical trends have been. I also think that, that this change is unique. And so a lot of our CCA peers actually last November and December came to their boards already to have this discussion on rate cuts. And so many of them have already cut their rates to either so that the customer bill is either even with or below the investor-owned utility. So I do like Director Hoffman's suggestion that we also look at, what some of our CCA peers are doing. Secondly, I do like Director Painter's idea of exploring perhaps a permanent rate cut versus a temporary one, because I think that allows us to, one, signal to our customers that, we do care about affordability and we are trying to get our customers' bills down as much as possible. But that, it's not possible for us to sustain a significant cut for multiple years. And so I think, having I do like that suggestion of looking at, perhaps a 2 cent reduction that's permanent and lasts beyond this year. And then, 2 cents where we recognize that this is a difficult year and a challenging year for everyone, and we are doing everything we can to help our customers. And I think also that the messaging around that will allow us to hopefully retain some of these larger customers. I also am very concerned about these larger commercial customers. And if we start to lose them, I think that will really impact our load. And if our energy costs are fixed and locked in already, it will be very difficult for us. We will be facing decreasing revenues and we have fixed energy costs. So I think there are a lot of positives to Director Painter's suggestion. And then lastly, on the on the emissions and the purchase, the purchase of the short-term contracts, I also think that, we should be looking at the value, like what is the value proposition of those contracts. I think in the next section, there's a slide in there, that shows that, the cost of those things. We've spent $202 million in 25. We spent like $130+ million in this year, fiscal 26, and that number's going down to $33 million. And again, I don't know exactly, what the scenarios are, but I think that really shows the financial exposure that we have to those short-term contracts. And so I think really as a board, we really need to decide, what is the value of that? And are we getting any environmental benefits? And if we are doing it for emission purposes, I think the prior staff presentation shows that when we go to hourly accounting, our emissions are going to go up anyways. Like we're not going to be able to claim, 1 pound of carbon emission anymore. Things are changing. The regulations, the legislation is changing. And so our emissions also, our reported emissions are also going to be going up. So, just query how much money we want to spend buying these attributes if next year, our emissions are going to look worse than they are this year anyways. Anyway, and because of that, I do think it's important because of the financial exposure to these short-term contracts that we put in place guardrails so that, it's not just for this year, but for future years. And I do like the idea of giving management some flexibility and also introducing, price caps so that, if we do exceed budget or if energy prices spike for some reason, that, staff comes back to the board and that we have this conversation. Thank you.
And thank you all again for your presentation. I did want to ask you, I don't know, I stepped out to use the restroom, but did you all speak to the reserve policy where we're at? I know we approved it in 2024, but where do we stand in terms of the 60%? Is that the medium of all the CCAs? The only reason I ask is because I happen to be in a city where we have a pretty robust reserve policy. Our percentage is usually higher than most of our cities of our size or any late neighboring cities. So I just can't remember when we approved that in 2024, did we meet that? I don't think that was actually changed in 2024, but I'm wondering where do we stand in terms of that 60% as it relates to other CCAs? Did you get that, Maida or Kyle?
Yeah, I think we got that question. The, not readily available, Director.
Okay, for
Right
sure.
now. I think we can get that back.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, again, doesn't have to be available. I think it's also another consideration as we, I think you're talking to elected officials. Most elected officials are going to lean into a preservance of reserve policy. Certainly, if we developed a policy, we would want to adhere to the policy. And also, the recognition of, and I think someone mentioned it, what actually is the reserve policy to be used for? I mean, we've had cities, including mine, we didn't go into our reserve during the pandemic. And one would think that that was a serious situation, I think. But for some, it was serious enough where some of us didn't have to go into our reserve. So, I mean, I guess it goes back to, again, when are we going to decide, both as an agency, but beyond just us, right? Like what does the use of reserve look like and when? It's just an important question. I think part of reserve policies, especially when it comes to those percentages, is also understanding like how are we comparing to other agencies as we just determine what is actually the use of our reserve. It's just a strategy question. Thank you, Maida and Cal, for the
Maida may have
presentations.
some insight on it. I don't know, Maida, if you want to talk.
Yeah, thank you. So for last fiscal year, the one that we have closed and we have audited results, 24-25, we did not hit our reserve and liquidity goals. We were below.
Gotcha.
We were at 218 days of the 240 and 84% of our reserves. So we had hit our reserve and liquidity goals in the past, but it's a moving target, right? So it changes because it's a percentage and a moving target. So with the projections for 25, 26, the current year, we are projecting to hit both the liquidity and the reserve goals. And I just want to touch briefly that one of the reasons why this is a little bit skewed, it's the early payment of a large invoice that we discussed in many board meetings, that they were shifted to the previous year. So the previous year had a final results that were way less than we had projected in the beginning, but then we shifted that to this year. So that's why this year we are hitting those both goals with hopefully a little bit more comfortable. And then all of those options, we would hit the reserve and liquidity goals for the next fiscal year. But like as Kyle mentioned, the more aggressive options would put us in a more sensitive position for a few other points that we discussed.
And Maida, I love that answer. That was incredibly comprehensive, more than I wanted. I was actually just asking about how the percentage itself compares to other CCA's reserve policy. So I think you answered kind of a strategy question that I probably would have following that, but I was just wondering, is that 60% in the middle or at the top in terms of that percentage number?
How we compare against fellow CCAs is the question.
Yeah, we have some studies on that, and then we can discuss and bring it to you at a later time, something more organized with them. Yes.
That would be great. And again, just a strategy question as we consider what is the use of our reserve mixed in with the time we use it to. Is this the best time to use it is always going to be a question I'm sure this board will always be asking, considering we don't know what's going to come, right? But what we know is our experiences and of course what the staff has projected. One of the things that comes to mind often is at this moment in our time as an agency is, the stats look good. I know there's a lot of changes in the industry, but the stats, right, look good, whether we're talking about retention, whether we're talking about the community programs and some of the funding that our cities and counties get from just being a part of this agency. I think something that is coming to mind a lot is whether or not a sense of moral panic is approaching some of these conversations as opposed to data sets. The data, of course, that we have would suggest maybe we don't do anything. I mean, that's what I'm reading, right? But I think also anecdotal data, right, from individuals and on the board, but also in our communities might incite a need to move. So I just wonder, because the data looks so promising in a way, whether or not action or non-action in this moment, meaning the status quo, is an opportunity for us to just dive deeper into this work and understanding it. It makes all of this still relevant. It makes it so that we're better strategists as board members and policymakers. But I also wonder if if leaning into these conversations and also moving status quo would provide a deeper opportunity for us to reach the goals that we've been aiming to reach for the last 15 years, but kind of dig deeper. So that's just a comment. It's not a question to you all. I just wanted to note that as a potential conversation that the board will have in the future. So thank you again. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for the presentation. It was very informative. I always feel like I'm in school when I sit here in front of you because there's so much to learn. And I know we have no control over PG&E and how they do their business, but it just seems odd that they could be far cheaper than us when they have such great infrastructure costs that have to be accounted for. Is there any way that we can equalize the cost that they have and their rates?
Yeah. Good question, Director. I'll take that on quickly. So I think if you look at the bill, there are three components, right? One is the generation, and then there is the T&D, and then PCIA is kind of in the generation realm. So T&D is where their infrastructure around wires and poles business come in. So obviously they have costs, they will set rates based on that for that portion. For generation, they're also out there. They do own generation fleet, which obviously they have prudence to kind of manage that too. But all in all, I think they're out there too to buy on behalf of customers, just like how any load serving entity would do. So on that aspect, we are competing with them. And if we look at historically too, keeping PCIA a bit, our generation rates have tended to be lower than PG&E's. And that's what the history shows. It's just the PCIA, including PCIA too, which is the setup portfolio they manage on behalf of customers who they still have and also who departed, right? I think that's where the biggest problem has been how do you value that portfolio and who should get a first dip at that portfolio? I think those are the policy discussions which happen at CPUC. So part of that really happened, the PCIA, apparently PG&E over-collected in 2025. They're trying to, they under-collected in 2025. They're trying to collect all that in 2026. It's over $2 billion. So that's what putting the divergence between, departed customers and bundle customers. And bundle customers are PG&E customers who buy generation from PG&E. So the bottom line is, if you purely look at generation, which is to an extent level playing field, we are competing fine. I think our power resources team, our entire team, we are able to procure energy and all these attributes at a reasonable market prices, and we are hedging them too, not to expose ourselves. And it's traditionally or historically been lower than PG&E's, to your point. Is the PCIA, which is swinging, causing that volatility.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much. I think we're all hungry.
I hear that. Do we have any members of the public in the Concord office that wish to speak? Seeing none, Tanya, could you let me know if we have any members of the public online that would like to speak? Okay, with no raised hands online, go ahead, Don and Vicken.
Oh, I just wanted to thank you so much. Really broad, pertinent input and questions. I heard twice about the words. I hope I don't come across as I'm playing with words, but they're important. Permanent rates probably would not be, looking at in the future. So the idea, I think, between two board members, I just want to let you know what I heard. Maybe we can consider reducing the generation rate portion that we have direct control over and allocate a portion on the PCIA adjustment that would be maybe just for next fiscal year, and it will go away. I just beg you not to use the word permanent rates. That's it. It's things we can bring to the board as is needed. Thank you.
All right. So we want to let you all have lunch. we haven't had a break since 10, so we want y'all to have a break. We also promised to end at 2 o'clock, and that may mean that our last item doesn't have time for a lot of dialogue. But let's take a 15-minute break and grab some food, and then if y'all are up for it, we'll begin the next presentation while you're eating to save time. Thank you. Say something.
Oh, now we're recording. I just wanted to make an announcement to everyone who's here. The lemons that are on the table that everyone saw at lunchtime, those are from my tree. Take as many as you want. I can bring many, many more. They're Meyer lemons, but this year, actually, that's what we were calling them last year. This year, we're calling them Mayer lemons.
Thank you for sharing lemons. That is wonderful. Wow. Well, as we get ready to launch into our next presentation, I just wanted to provide a little summary of what I'm hearing. And I just want to thank everyone for the wonderful engagement and feedback. It's really helping staff to figure out how we might focus in on the options that are being presented into the ones that are resonating the most with folks. What I'm hearing an interest in is maintaining green targets to maintain our credibility. I'm hearing that we want to avoid any options that would impact our credit rating in a negative way. I'm hearing that we want to maintain our programs, generally, the programs that operate in our community. I'm also hearing a leaning towards something around option 2, where our generation rate is at the same place that PG&E's generation rate is. So there's parity there, but also possibly a temporary rate reduction being added for the next year. That's something that would expire after a year. Great ideas, really, really helpful to hear that feedback. I'm also hearing an interest in building in some flexibility with our procurement. And I'm also hearing that there's a real interest in refunding our CARES credit and possibly even adding to it. So feel free to reach out after this meeting or at any time, really, if there are things you think we're missing. But these are kind of the general themes that I'm hearing. I'm also hearing that there's an interest in getting more information in 3 areas. First of all, comparison to other CCAs and similar agencies, particularly around green content, emissions, and possibly also reserve levels. So we can pull that together. Also, a breakdown between commercial and residential customers. We can certainly provide that. We do have to follow some privacy laws that don't allow us to list customers, but we can show you the breakdown, and we can certainly talk offline if you have any specific questions. And then secondly, a regular reporting out on our opt-out levels. That's easy to do. We are tracking that internally. It doesn't need to be confidential, so we can certainly share that. So I will wrap up there. We have a lot more coming to you that we're going to hear today, and then also next week when we get to our board meeting. But your input today will help us narrow down a little bit and focus on where we're hearing the main themes. So now I'm going to hand it back over to our staff to present the proposed fiscal year 2026-27 budget elements. And if you have questions and comments that we aren't able to get to before we wrap up at 2 p.m., please write them down, email them to us. We're also happy to meet with you between now and the board meeting if you have questions. We will also have information sessions set up prior to the board meeting that you can sign up for. All right, I'm going to hand it over to you, Maida. Thanks. Oh, and I'm so sorry. One last thing I was asked to comment on is Pittsburgh Power. We were able to check in with Director Kabata and clarified that Pittsburgh Power is a different provider than MCE. They are a municipal utility of their own serving Mare Island. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I just want to apologize for everybody for my mistake. I was misinformed, and I've gotten my information mixed up. So I do apologize for that misinformation to everybody. Thank you for forgiving me.
Thank you, Dawn. Hello again, everyone. Now that we walk through the proposed rate, we are going to walk you through the proposed fiscal year budget for year 26-27. I'm sorry, just 1 minute. We have, sorry, just bear with me for a minute. I'm getting a not so great here. We have shared this item, the proposed fiscal year, with the XCOM earlier. We didn't have a lot of time for discussion, but we had the opportunity to discuss this item with the newly formed Finance Committee this Monday and started a discussion. And now we had continued to refine assumptions and analysis, and we are bringing more details to you all for a deeper dive into our budget. I also want to highlight that we are actively reviewing opportunities to reduce costs and continue to fine-tune the budget. So the budget that we are reviewing today is not the proposed final budget. This is a draft, a working draft, and the final proposed budget will be presented to you all next month after we have been able to discuss and incorporate some of the input. Again, I'm Maida Strauss, CFO and Treasurer, and you have joining us today in person at the office, Efren Okshala, Manager of Finance, who has been with MCE for 6 years, and he leads FP&A efforts at MCE, modeling and reporting. Let's jump to the first slide of the presentation, please. Thank you. So to begin today, I want to start by looking ahead. So this slide, I'm picking up exactly where we left in the end of the rates presentation. You've seen this graph in a larger format. We zoomed in to explain that starting in 2027, we expect the temporary distortion to be resolved and the PCIA values projecting to converge, eliminating the anomaly that we are seeing today. We discussed all of that in the previous presentation. And in other words, the longer term outlook is positive. All the forecasts are positive. And this sets the stage to a stable, lower cost trajectory for MCE customers moving forward. Next slide, please. Okay, now let's address the current situation. Today, bundle PG&E generation plus PCIA is temporarily lower than MCE generation plus PCIA. We discussed that this is an anomaly and that CalCCA has filed an appeal on these PCIA rates. And MCE's current power costs are lower, giving us rate reduction headroom, and we developed the rate reductions we discussed and that we are bringing into our budget presentation. Build up. Next slide, please. So based on that, what I just mentioned, and based on all of our discussions on the rate side, we develop those options, those multiple option rate deductions, and we are going to be looking into those, putting that together with the budget and see how does that translate to us. A quick summary is that option 2 and 3 would create a deficit which could be covered by our ORF, and we're going to talk more about that too. And 4 and 5 would create a deficit despite the ORF withdrawals. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a great slide. I personally really like this slide, the way we put things together. This is our operating reserve fund. So we established in this fund in 2019, and I'm proud to say that MCE was the very first CCA to establish this operating reserve fund. And this was an initiative of our CEO, Vikin Kazarjian. And after that, we had many CCAs following our policy and following our accounting for this rate fund. So the deposits are made when change in net position exceeds 5% of revenues or after the reserve targets are met and obligations paid, and the withdrawals to cover projected revenue shortfalls that might happen. So the current limit is 10% of operating and non-operating revenues. This is the current policy that we set in 2019. So for next month, I would like you all to consider a policy amendment for possible future deposit into this fund and using the surplus of this current fiscal year our forecast points that we will have some surplus to add to this fund. And this is especially important in case we are going to be using part in total or part of this fund, so we can have that for the future, as we have great forecasts, but we don't know for certain what's going to happen. Next slide, please. I'm going to pass it on to Efren to continue discussing energy revenue.
Thank you, Maida. Can everyone hear me okay? Good afternoon, board. My name is Efren Oxla. I'm the manager of finance, and I'll be supporting Maida throughout the presentation. So as you just heard from Maida, your board has 5 rate options this fiscal year, and each one shapes the budget. What we have here is the energy revenue under each of the 5 options being presented. In the current fiscal year, the budget for energy revenue is $814 million, and that is actually net of $5 million that was allocated to the MCE CARES program, which provides customer bill relief, and we do expect to use the full amount in the current fiscal year. Under a status quo scenario, the numbers I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong slide. So on this slide, again, we have the revenue under each option. And depending on which option your board selects, energy revenue can drop anywhere between 16%, so that's option 1, all the way to 31%. So each rate option does represent a pretty significant drop in revenue, with option 5 representing the biggest drop. Next slide, please. So what we have here is how we bridge the revenue gap that is created under each option. For the current fiscal year, again, our revenue is $814 million. Under a status quo scenario, revenue would be $772 million. And you'll notice that that's about a 5.1% decrease year over year. That is primarily because we have adjusted our load forecast to account for the last 2 summers, which have been pretty mild. So the forecast takes that into account for the coming fiscal year. Under the status quo, there are no changes to our rate structure. So again, the only adjustment there is to the forecast. Moving down to option 1, under option 1, energy revenue would total $684 million. And this option would not require an ORF withdrawal, meaning this option provides sufficient revenues to cover all of the projected expenses for MCE. Under option 2, energy revenue would total $666 million. And this option would require a transfer from the ORF of $17 million, which would bring the total revenue to $683 million. Under this option, MCE's fiscal year would show a break-even change in net position. Under option 3, energy revenue would total $616 million. And this option also requires a withdrawal, but it does increase from $17 million to $67 million. And again, the total revenue here is $683 million, which is sufficient to cover the expenses. So this option would also produce a break-even year for MCE. Option 4 and 5 are a bit different. These represent the most aggressive rate reductions that your board can approve. Under option 4, energy revenue would total $589 million, but it would require withdrawing the maximum amount of the operating reserve fund, which at this time is $70 million. However, even with this withdrawal, MCE's revenue would not be sufficient to cover all the expenses, and as we will see later on, the agency would show a loss under option 4. Likewise, under option 5, revenue would total 164 before any ORF withdrawals. This option also requires the maximum amount from the ORF, and the total revenue would be $634 million. So as you can imagine, if the previous one leads to a loss, this one leads to an even greater loss, despite full utilization of the ORF. And I think just to put things into perspective, it took the agency about 6 years to build the ORF balance to 70 million. We're potentially looking at utilizing the full balance in one fiscal year, which would limit MCE's flexibility in terms of absorbing unexpected financial costs. Next slide, please. So moving away from energy revenue, we're now looking at the cost of energy. And the story here is quite favorable compared to what we presented for the present fiscal year budget. What we're seeing is a pretty significant drop in the cost of energy. We're projecting $632 million for the cost of energy. That is a decrease of about $134 million or 17.5%. What we're seeing is lower prices for renewables, for hedges, and for resource adequacy. And in general, there's ample supply in the market and there's soft demand, so that's keeping the prices low. On the graph, you'll see the cost of energy separated into 6 categories, or the Super 6, as sometimes it's called. Our biggest component in the cost of energy is our hedge contracts. That's projected at $225 million, or 35.6% of the total budget. We have separated our renewable energy into the 2 categories that you see here. So we are seeing an increase in the long-term portion of our renewable energy, and that is because we have more projects coming online, and so that is being reflected in the numbers. In terms of the short-term purchases, that is decreasing from $131 million to $33 million. And that is primarily because of the fall in renewable prices, so that's being captured here. And again, as you can see, we're also increasing our long-term procurement, and so that offsets any potential increases in the short-term category. Resource adequacy is also going down from $146 million to $106. That is a 16.7% decrease. And net CAISO costs, those are staying flat. Carbon-free, that's seeing an increase of from $14 million to $21 million. And that simply reflects the fact that some of the contracts that we entered in 2024, which was the peak of the prices, will still be delivering in the coming fiscal year. Next slide, please. So here we have the cost of energy under each of the 5 rate options being presented. Under options 1 through 4, the cost of energy remains unchanged, meaning we make no changes to MCE's renewables or carbon-free target, and everything stays status quo. The option here that's different is, of course, option 5. Under this option, MCE would reduce its cost of energy by $17 million to $615 million. However, as we saw earlier, that would require changing our customer messaging, as our power mix would change as a result of those cuts. One thing I'll note here as well is that the numbers that you're seeing are net of $11.2 million in savings from prepays. Next slide, please. So now moving away from energy, we're now looking at operating expenses. And this is a broad category that covers a lot of the overhead expenses that MCE incurs to run the operations. Some expenses are outside of our control. For instance, some are tied to our customer accounts, while some are tied to our load. And at this time, and again, this number remains preliminary, the proposed budget for operating expenses is $54.8 million, representing an increase of $4.5 million or 9.1%. Next slide. In terms of what's driving that, we have those reasons listed on the right side of the slide here. We are seeing increases to our data manager line. we're seeing increased billing activity due to the enrollment of the City of Hercules. We're also seeing an increase in technical and scheduling consultants. Staff is proposing making some changes to this line, and those changes would come to the board for discussion in March. Next, we have PG&E service fees. Here, what we're seeing is an increase in the fee that PG&E charges MCE. This is a per account fee, which is increasing by 20% from 35 cents to 42 cents. So the upcoming fiscal year will capture the first year of the first full year of the increase that we're observing. Next, we have G&A, or general and administrative. Here, we're just simply seeing higher software and data platform costs, which is primarily due to the growth of AI. These products are becoming more expensive. We're also seeing increased membership dues for CalCCA, which is the advocacy group for CCAs across the state of California. Personnel is also here, but we will have a separate section shortly. So I'll go to the next slide, please. In terms of what's decreasing, we have made some adjustments. Legal and policy services is going down, and that is to better align with the actual spend that we're currently observing. Communication services, this one is seeing the most noticeable drop, and that's really in response to the budgetary environment that we're in. So staff has reduced the budget for advertising and also for sponsorships. Next, we have occupancy. Here, this is reflecting no major maintenance projects for the coming fiscal year, and it's also reflecting reduced rent since we moved from the larger office to this office, and that comes with a smaller monthly rent. So I'll now pass it to Maida, who's going to walk us through the section on personnel.
Thank you, Efren. Next slide, please. So here we have the personnel budget line before grant reimbursements. This is not what you see on the budget line, because you see on the budget line, you see after we receive grant reimbursement. But we're first going to analyze that to get a better perspective. So we are seeing an increase of 12.5% overall. And some of the reasons are the full impact of 13 new positions that we added in the current fiscal year, COLA and merit adjustments for staff, and addition of full-time roles for the next fiscal year. In this, I also would like to note that at MCE, we are focused on balancing affordability for our customers with also supporting our staff needs. And to help manage those costs, this proposed staffing budget does not include any merit increases for MCE staff at this year. The increased costs are driven by those items I pointed out, and those are preliminary numbers. We continue to work on them to refine and bring more updated for you all in the March XCOM and board. And the new positions that we are proposing, they are really we are really bringing strategic needs to our staffing needs to make sure that the resources are being provided are critical to our operational needs. And we'll talk more about that in the next slide. Next slide, please. So this is what you would see in the budget as a budget line. The personnel increase of 14.7%. The grant reimbursement is pretty much the same as last year, and would offset some of the positions there are that can be charged against those the grants that we have. Next slide, please. Here is a visual of the green one being our current full-time headcount, and the blue one being the proposed new hires that I mentioned before. But those are just preliminary numbers, and we are working on identifying other cost-saving opportunities. Next slide, please. So here is the impact of the new proposed positions for power resources, finance, and legal. And they would support the growth and the scale of MCE's operations, the growth of strategic finance functioning, position of MCE for more sustainable and compliant growth, and strengthening in-house technical and subject matter expertise. As an example, the reduction that we are seeing in the legal and policy line by bringing some of those services in-house. And also, the evolving external federal and regulatory requirements that are being opposed into us. Next slide, please. I think you skipped one. No,
No, that's the next one, Maida.
that's the next one. Yes, thank you.
Great. So I'll continue from here. So moving away from operating expenses, we're now looking at now non-operating revenue and expenses. In terms of revenues, we're seeing a modest increase of $447,000 or 2.4%. That's primarily driven by higher expected grant income, and that amount is actually, the grant amount is actually increasing by $1.7 million or 53.1%. The other item captured here is investment income. At this time, the proposed amount for investment income is $13.7 million, which is a decrease of $1.3 million against the current fiscal year budget. I do think this number may change depending on the rate option that your board selects, as MCE may have to liquidate securities throughout the year to have working capital. In terms of the non-operating expenses, we have banking fees here. That's directly tied to MCE's credit facility. That's seeing a modest increase of $25,000 or 11.1%. Grant expenses, you'll notice that this matches the grant income above, and that's because grant income or grants are not really income to MCE, they're a wash, and so we only recognize $1 in income when there's an equivalent dollar in expenses. Next slide, please. So we're now moving away from the operating fund, and now we're looking at the other three funds that MCE has. First, we have the Program Development Fund. This fund is what houses our transportation electrification programs, as well as some other electrification-focused pilot programs. In terms of the section at the top, the revenue and other sources, staff at this time is proposing a transfer of $8 million, which would represent an increase of $5.6 million or 238% from the current fiscal year. And the reason for that is that if you look at the bottom of the fund, there's currently a deficit that is being caused by the spending in the current fiscal year. We have seen tremendous demand for our transportation electrification incentives, and so that explains that deficit there. And the transfer would eliminate the deficit and would allow us to spend the amounts that you see under the expenditure section. Next, looking at the expenditure section, most of the spending is actually being allocated to our transportation electrification programs. I won't go into details, as Jamie did provide a really good breakdown of what those programs do. And the majority of the funds, again, would go there. The remaining funds would be allocated towards our heat pump water heater incentives, of which $682,000 would be allocated. The other items here, we also have a grant from the Marine Community Foundation, which supports with EV charging at affordable housing. And we have a line for community housing support, which is MCE funded and allows us to support electrification where sometimes it's not possible. Next slide, please. Okay, so next we have the Resiliency Virtual Power Plant. I know that's a mouthful. So this fund at this time does not require a transfer from the operating fund. It's primarily funded by grant programs at this based on what we have so far. So you'll notice that our revenue, we have a grant from the CEC, for VPP work. We have a federal earmark funding for 100,000, and then we have another grant from the Marine Community Foundation for $270,000. So in total, the proposed budget is $1.5 million, which is an increase of actually $98,000. That total there is incorrect, so please excuse the typo, which is a year-over-year increase of 7% for the total revenue and other sources line. In terms of the expenses, you'll notice that some of the expenses here match the revenue above. And again, that's reflecting the programs that are funded by grants. In terms of what MCE is actually funding, I would bring your attention to the CEC VPP Flex grant match component, of which MCE is pledging $1 million. So under this grant, MCE receives 1.2, but MCE must also spend $1 million as part of the grant. The other big line item here is MCE Sync. This line is staying relatively flat. We're proposing $927,000, which is actually a small decrease of $25,000 or 2.6%. And this program incentivizes our customers to charge during the off-peak hours, and it also encourages them to charge when electricity is the greenest on the grid. For this fund, if you look down at the bottom at the fund balance at end of period, we don't expect to use the full fund balance, so there would be some funds remaining at the end of the upcoming fiscal year. Next slide. Okay, and last but not least, we have the Energy Efficiency Fund. This is a pass-through fund because all the money here is from the CPUC, so it's entirely grant funded, and that's why you'll notice that revenue equals expenses. This fund finances all of the energy efficiency programs that MCE runs. Next slide. And with that, I'll pass it to Maida.
Thanks, Efren. Now putting together all of the revenues that we discussed in rates, cost of energy, and what we brought here to the budget presentation, the change in net position, it's actually a combined impact of all those, the energy costs, operating expenses, non-operating revenues, programs expenses, and that's the consolidated changing net position that we see on the screen. And bringing all the options that we discussed. So with that, also not on the screen, as I mentioned, this is we are workshopping today, and there are a lot of assumptions, and this in the screen was the best information we had when we sent the packet over to you all. But we also discussed about a possible decrease in program spending. So we have on the screen a 9.3 million. So if we reduce, that line would be reduced too. But if we implement the cost relief of 5 million or 7 million or whatever amount we are going to decide on it, we would also have to discount that from our consolidated changing net position. So with that, the option one, we had no ORF withdrawals with a consolidated changing net position of 755. Option two, with an ORF withdrawal of 17 million, the same 755. Option three, with an ORF of 66, and the same 755. And option two, all the ORF, 70 million, and the consolidated changing net position of minus 23.5. And option five, all the ORF of 70 million plus a cost of energy reduction of 17, and the consolidated changing net position of about 31.6. So even I just want to point it out that the agency has sufficient cash to run the operations, and no external funding sources would be required. Even under option 4 or 5, we would be using our reserves. Next slide, please. So we will touch again briefly the reserves and liquidities that we used on rates presentation. Next slide, please. Okay, so here is I'm bringing the reserves back because it's important and it's the reason why we set the budget and rates together so we can look into our reserves and see how they would meet. So I don't want to spend a lot of time here, but this is just so we can visualize in the end what we have discussed. Next slide, please. And now this is the liquidity visualization of putting all together the budget with rates. With that, we finish our budget presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
And Maida and Efren, I think in the interest of time, we're going to start with a public comment online, and then we'll jump to all of the directors. Are there any questions from the public online? Okay, no raised hands at this time. Let me know if that changes. Is there any public comment in the room here in the Concord office? Nope. Okay, great. Thanks. Efren, I'll let you lead through facilitation of the questions.
Great. Does anybody have any questions? All right, Director McCormick.
Sorry, just one question. On slide 20, we are looking at the Program Development Fund, and the top line things that transfer from operating fund and Deep Green Premium. And so I guess I thought Deep Green Premium is what funded the programs. So it just mean it doesn't cover. Does that mean that the Deep Green Premium does not cover programs, and we have to draw from the operating fund to make that work?
Yeah, so we transferred 50% of the Deep Green Premium into the fund, but as you'll notice, the expenses exceed the amount from the Deep Green. So we're proposing an additional amount to cover all the expenses, and the transfer would also eliminate the deficit that you see at the bottom of the fund.
So how much? What is the normal transfer from Deep Green Premium?
Yeah, so of this $8 million, $2.4 million is attributed to the Deep Green transfer.
Okay. Oh, so we have to subsidize it. So that's the approved stuff okay, that's approved now. Okay, so we have to subsidize that, even though we tell customers, well, I guess it is. It's going to the programs, but it doesn't really cover all the programs we've signed up for.
Correct. Yeah, but again, as Jamie pointed out, this could change because your board will get some options that could potentially reduce the amount that we would spend or invest in these programs. Yes, Director Wilkinson.
Just a question about the compensation budget, which obviously the year-on-year growth is very high and seems to run in the opposite direction of the argument that we don't have enough money to cut rates, but we have enough money for these large increases in the compensation budget. And so my question there is, where you say a lot of that is due to the full year inclusion of these employees from last year, didn't we budget last year for full-time equivalent for those last year already?
We did, Director. What we're saying is some of these employees were hired later in the fiscal year or maybe halfway through. So the coming fiscal year sees the full year impact of that salary annualized.
But given that the budget last year reflected the full-time equivalent already, why does it need to increase even further? You already captured it in last year's budget.
Right. So what the board approved was the amount that we expected to spend, right? So the accrued amount, the amount.
So it wasn't for a full 12-month hire. In some cases,
it wasn't the analyzed amount. It was just what we expected to spend during that fiscal year.
Okay. And so you're saying of this increase in salaries, all you're essentially including in there is the COLA, the full year equivalent for these employees last year. There's no merit increases, there's no promotions budgeted in. And then you've got these 4 additional hires this year. So the only wiggle room we have as a board is to not have those additional hires in relation to this budget. Everything else is locked in.
Yes, that's correct. The budget does not assume any promotions or merit increases.
As of for January 1st, 2026 or January 1st, 2027?
In the entire fiscal year period that's coming up. So, yes.
Fiscal year begins on April 1.
I'm sorry, but obviously pay increases given on January 1st, 2026 have massive impact for this fiscal year. So are the the merit increases and promotions that were given outside of the budget that you had for last year that don't fit within the budget for last year and that you're effectively saying are already given and therefore they have to be assumed into this fiscal year?
Well, I wouldn't frame it that way, but yes, the merit or promotions that occur in this fiscal year, the annualized amount would also be captured in the upcoming fiscal year.
So you exceeded the budget for last year in terms of the merit increases that were given. I mean, I guess the only thing here is there's no board control over anything in that case, because you're saying merit increases and promotions are given and then they're a fait accompli before it comes to the budget.
Yeah, so I think the budget is based on an accrual basis. So when you approve the budget, you're approving the amounts that we expect to spend in the fiscal year. I think what you're asking is perhaps we could have provided a forecast of what the annualized amount would have been of those new positions to really see, the subsequent fiscal year impact. Maybe that would have helped. But again, when you're approving the budget, you're approving it on an accrual basis, right? So what MCE expects to spend, that's what you're approving.
Right, but again, pay rises and merit increases and promotions that were given on January 1st, 2026 didn't fit in the budget that you were given. So you're locking in numbers for 26, 27 that haven't been given board approval.
Well,
let me clarify one thing, Efren, if I may. So for last fiscal, we are not going over the budget that was approved for personnel on the current fiscal year. As a matter of fact, we are very much under budget for the current fiscal year. And the budget that we have on the screen here is the impact of positions that were hired in the end of the fiscal year. And those positions were all approved by the board and they were all included by the board. By no means we are going over the budgeted amount in the current fiscal year of board approved.
I understand, but it's therefore imposing, if you're saying there were promotions, merit increases given in January that have impacts in 26, 27, significant impacts, I'm guessing, but it would be good to get that breakdown. Again, that's coming without any board consultation, and the compensation budget is meant to be approved by the board.
Well, maybe Don wants to weigh in, but I believe the hiring authority has been delegated to Don.
As long as it's within the constraints of the budget that's been approved, and the budget hasn't yet been approved.
Right. And I think what Maeda is saying, the current fiscal year budget did account for those promotions, right? But it was only for the time period of the fiscal budget from March through April. So in the upcoming fiscal year budget, we're now showing you what the annualized cost will be of those changes that were made in the current fiscal year budget.
Right, but that means if you ran that model every year, January you could give significant pay increases just for a couple of months that then impact the following 9 months of the year in a really meaningful way. And the board has no way to constrain that, because that really is a big increase in year on year at a time when we're telling ratepayers that we can't cut their rates to compete with PG&E. And so it sounds, I hate to say it, a little tone deaf to me in terms of the priorities of the agency. And so that worries me. And so one suggestion I have going forwards, which would make more sense to me, is that there is an alignment between when promotions and pay rises happen. They should happen on April 1st when the board has already approved the budget, because right now you're front running the budget. And that to me feels really wrong, because I understand that we've delegated authority, but within the constraints of the budget. But you're basically constraining the budget by telling us what you've already locked into. That feels really wrong. So as a recommendation going forward, if there's a way to move that to be more,
we're doing for the next fiscal year.
Okay, fine.
Yes,
so
correct.
we're getting in alignment. That to me makes a lot more sense. And I understand it's really tricky with how it is right now. And so there's no intentional blame there. It's just, it's not a system that works. And so moving to a system that does makes more sense.
Yes, and I should have clarified, but yes, for the subsequent fiscal year, whatever promotions would be assumed or a merit would take place on April 1st to align with the beginning of the fiscal year.
Okay. And so the only thing I would say is, again, just to try and be sensitive to ratepayers, is if you can avoid hiring more, unless they're absolutely necessary, I would just not do that right now. It's just a terrible look for us as an agency, in my view. Others may disagree.
Yes, Director Painter?
Yeah, thank you for the information. I actually also have a question on the on the hires, and you may have said this, I may not have gotten it correct, but was there some money in either contract work or outside consulting that we were spending that we're now bringing somebody in-house? So what I'd like to know is there a delta there in terms of what, whether we're adding staff in-house, are we saving in other areas because we're not spending in that category? I think we do need to be sensitive to new hires, and I think we need to really understand, and not for today, I'm not asking you to explain the whole thing today, but perhaps for our full board meeting, what the hires are for, what, is there savings on the consulting end, and what is the delta increase, so that we're really making a thoughtful decision on where we're adding employees.
I got a quick one real quick. So at the beginning, we talked about deleting some programs. I think there were 3 programs, which amounted to $5.5 million. Is that going to affect the head count in the customer programs section? We have 16 full-time employees. I just wondered if we still need 16 people.
I think Jamie wants
Yeah,
to talk.
I'm happy to respond to that. That is something that we considered, and we don't anticipate that we would need to reduce headcount because of the way that staff are assigned to programs. Typically, staff are working on multiple areas, and so we don't anticipate a staff reduction as a result.
Is there a way when it comes to the programs, instead of just having those 3 that we look at, can we see the numbers for each program? So that way all the board members can look at each one, and maybe there's something that they'd rather pull out instead of what was there? Again, not that we will or won't. It just might be easier if we look at each one line by line as a suggestion.
Thank you. We're taking notes on any final thoughts or recommendations folks have. And I know we need to let you go real soon, but any final thoughts or suggestions?
Thank you.
Yes, I do have questions on the compensation piece of it as well. I think it would be helpful if you could break out, what are the salaries and benefits of the existing staff? And then what are the 5 new ones? And then what's the amount of the full impact of the 13 positions? Because I agree I think it's confusing here because I agree with Director Wilkinson. If those 13 positions from last year were already in this budget, in the 2025-26 budget, you shouldn't be seeing such a huge increase. And so if these merit increases for, that were given out in January 2026 were in the prior budget, then I feel like that really is front running, the board's ability to be able to control our compensation costs. And if you just do the math here of 33.2 million divided over 120 employees, that's $276,000 on average per employee. That's a huge number. So I think really, in a time where we're trying to signal, affordability to our ratepayers and fiscal responsibility, I think we really need to be looking at our personnel costs, especially, what we can control. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Andre. We do have a breakdown, and we'll share that at the upcoming March Executive Committee.
Sorry, one last thought is also, instead of showing the board, the budget from last year, or in addition to showing the budget from last year, it would be helpful to show what is the actual year-to-date costs for personnel. Because if you're saying that you didn't hire at the times that you expected to hire and you're seeing savings, it would be very helpful to see that here alongside the budget for last year.
Sure. And I believe we're going to provide a larger budget update in terms of year-to-date. So yes, we can include that.
May I? Really quick. So I think what I'm hearing too is also an opportunity to educate the board on the roles and what the staffing looks like. If there's any unfilled positions, the competitive market of these positions and the technical requirements for staff. In addition, to be frank, I know it takes a lot of staff time for just to prepare for these board meetings. And I'd be interested to know how much staff time and how many staff are going into preparing all these meetings. We, as a governing board of electeds, every 2 years, this board is going to shift. We can never really catch up on the education of those of your board members, and that's a burden and a cost burden to this agency. But it is what it is. I'm hoping we will all win our next election, and this board will stay static, and people will stay on. But the likelihood of that happening is not very likely. And so the board staff is always trying to catch this board up. And I somebody who doesn't come from this background, you put a lot of investment into me personally. So I can be a board member that can really contribute. So I think we want to be mindful of that. But again, just kind of sum that up, I think that we can learn more about staff roles, how that is going into this agency, into our communities, fulfills our mission and vision, and the staff time back into this board. I think that we need to understand that too. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Efren and Maida, and especially huge thanks to the board members that came today and provided such valuable feedback. We will turn you loose. Feel free to grab any food on the way out. It's available. And yes, parking validations are on the front entry desk. It'll be on a little sticky note. Grab one of those on your way out. Thank you.